You want to roll, Michael, or keep? Great. Well, welcome everybody to the December 12th special board meeting of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District. I guess you know you've been doing this for a while if you recognize everybody by first name in the room, including distinguished guests, Howard Barnes, Dick Shanahan, Michelle Gamble, Matt Wheeler, Dave Wrightley. Thanks everybody for joining us. So I'll call the meeting to order. Michael, do you have any announcements?
Welcome to the Kirkwood Meadows PUD District Special Board Meeting. The meeting is being held live over the internet, and the public can view this meeting by going to KMPUD.com and following the appropriate link. If the public would like to make a comment or ask a question, please email msharp@kmpud.com and the board will respond appropriately. Staff would like to acknowledge our consultants are here. As President Shanahan said, Howard Barnes, our U.S. consultant, Dick Shanahan, our general counsel, Michelle Gamble, our project manager with RCI, Dave Wrightley, our electrical engineer with Exponential, and Matt Wheeler, our water engineer. Alan Zelinka, our rates consultant, will be calling in at 1:40 for that agenda time. Thank you.
Great. And Peter, would you call the meeting? Call a roll, please.
Sure. Rickard? Here. Andy? Here. O'Grady?
Here.
Norbert here. And Epstein? Here. Okay, we're all here.
So item 4 is oral communications, opportunity for members of the public to address the board on non-agenda items regarding district business. No action can be taken by the board on matters not appearing on the agenda. I think, Michael, you wanted to give an update on some recent activity or activities.
On Thursday at 9:30, we held a tabletop exercise to go over our power outage scenarios. This is a true story, by the way. So, in fact, Bob Epstein came by the meeting, and we were all in there talking about what it would happen from the unlikely, possibility that the lights would go out. At 10:40, the power went out. We were able to restore Valley Power through the powerhouse within 10 minutes. We determined that the problem was with the 34 kV line and that the 115 was not tripped. Staff mobilized by checking fault indicators on sectionalizing cabinets along the route and determined that the problem was with the 34 kV overhead. Very difficult travel. We encountered a half a dozen trees that were down on the road. We learned so much in a windstorm in that area, especially with the power line fire that had been through there years and years ago. The trees are very unstable. We encountered 6 trees that we used the winch on the command vehicle to actually move trees out of the way and manpower and get the trees out so that we can get our vehicles through. As you can see by these pictures, we actually found the tree. It was found the tree was leaning on the 34 kV and the 12 kV conductors between poles 15 and 16. That's about midway up that hill going to the line shack, if you know. Luckily, there's a road right next to it that we share with PG&E. Way luckily that there was a road right next to it, because if this happened in a different area, we'd be on generator power out. After considerable effort, staff was able to bring the tree down. We actually chopped it down, brought a winch onto its lower side, and actually winched it away from the line, and it actually rolled off the lines, and then snapped. And these poles are going like this, but thankfully, and Dave Wrightley can attest to that, there was no damage to the conductors, no damage to the insulators. My back is a little sore, but besides that, I think we're in pretty good shape. So we learned a whole bunch. We were able to, once we did a visual inspection and made sure that there was no physical damage to the lines, with consultation with Dave, and luckily he was with us. Yeah, that was way luckily. We were able to go to KM Green. We reset the alarms and restore power to the powerhouse, and then Brandy, with the help of staff, turned off the generators and turned back power onto the valley. So congratulations to all. I think staff did an amazing job to make sure that happened. And Rick Ansel, Steve Neff, Dave Rightly were the heroes out in the Out Valley, and then Joe Campbell, Rena, and Brandy were here in the doing the administration work. So the power outage.
Michael, can I just ask a quick question? How do you, your inspection was with binoculars or something to see that there's no physical damage?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, just looking at it. There's no other way getting up there. These are very tall, so.
You could have climbed the tree before bringing it down.
Yeah. Well, when I started hitting the tree with the axe, I saw Dave Rightly move considerably back away. And once the sparks stopped, then he was fine with it. But. So the power outage affected the wastewater treatment plant, the Chatterbox, and Train 2. And if Rick wouldn't mind, could you give the details on where we stand with the problems at the wastewater treatment plant?
Yeah, so we were able to resolve the issue with the Chatterbox, which is an auto dialer for some of the alarms that we have at the plant. We actually had a consultant from Tesco Controls come up and put a jumper cable to restore the system, to hard reset to factory program the system, and we were able to restore it, so it's working fine. The other issue is the Festo switch, which is a vacuum actuated device, failed during this event as well. It's not related to power, it's an air vacuum switch. Unfortunately, we weren't able to restore that switch, and we've ordered some from New York. They'll be here on Monday. So currently we're operating on Train 1, which is fine. We can survive on Train 1 for a long period of time. But we want to restore Train 2, so we have to have Train 2 back online on Monday. That's it.
Great. So the only other thing I'd note is, I know most of you were up here. I'm not sure what it was like in Sacramento, but when I left San Francisco yesterday about 1 p.m., over half the city's electricity was out. You know, you had some, I know you flew in, Howard, but it was a really windy period. Any other oral communications from the public? Nancy?
I'm Nancy Trevette. I'm a Westside homeowner, and it would be wonderful if at some point the district or the board could explain how the names KM Green and KM Blue came about.
Well, I don't think we'd be doing anything wrong by answering that briefly, do you?
It was a decision made by Tom Henney and the previous electrical engineers. They asked Tom, what do you want to name this substation? And they started talking about colors, and blue and green came up, and that's, you know, as soon as it's put on a plan, it becomes permanent. So I love our, you know, exponential, but for some reason our breakers are called 52K and 52.1, where, anyway, we have to learn this stuff, but that's how it happened.
Thank you.
Great. Any other input from the public? So we'll move on to corrections to the agenda or consent calendar. Does anybody have any? I think you might.
Yeah, I'd like to defer on the employee housing lease and consent calendar.
Any others? So I'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent calendar.
Move that we adopt the consent calendar with the modification just made.
And I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. So moving on to 8 new and unfinished business action items. 8A is the discussion and possible action regarding the final issues associated with the Out Valley Power Line project. Manager Sharp and Michelle. first one is overall construction update. Welcome, Michelle.
So the Out Valley project will come in 10 parts today. We'll talk about the overall construction update. We'll talk about the project closeout. We'll talk about the press release. We will talk about change orders, a discussion of the overall project costs and remaining risks. For some reason, my computer's way slow. And we'll talk about powerhouse depreciation study, the Out Valley operations and maintenance, load dependent start-stop. We'll talk about a snowmobile, and finally we'll talk about the compliance with the PG&E transmission interconnection agreement. So we'll start off with Michelle, who will give a overhaul construction update.
Well, good afternoon. Sorry I missed the excitement yesterday, but I'm so glad Dave was here. Over the last month, we have been dealing with two minor construction items. One is completion of the punch list items for the backup station service up at KM Green. We've been working with PG&E, having numerous meetings. They had a punch list of items. Those items were complete by Wilson Construction last Tuesday. The only remaining item up there is the correction of some of the barrier posts that they'd like to see. We have to have another inspection by Amador County, and that's scheduled for Tuesday, as long as they can get to the site, and then we'll have one more final inspection by PG&E, and then we can get that backup station service energized. And then kind of out of the blue, we received a punch list from Caltrans the week before Thanksgiving. Doesn't surprise me, I don't know why, but their items were all very minor. We followed up with Q&D. They got out there the next day, and they were able to complete all but one of the items. The only item they were unable to complete is the repainting of a stop bar at the Sheeler Lake Trailhead parking lot. They're not going to be able to get that done this winter, so they'll just come back in the spring and get that stop bar. Not a critical issue on any of ours, plates at this point. We've also been working with PG&E and the Forest Service. We'd always intended on amending the PG&E special use permit with the Forest Service to include the alignment of the backup station service. And so we've been proceeding with PG&E in that direction. We had a meeting with PG&E 2 weeks ago down in Sacramento on some other items, and I ended up talking with Carol Reed, their lands agent. And she dug up some contradictory information than what we had been provided by the Forest Service regarding the existence of a special use permit at all for PG&E's 12 kV line, which we had been told by the Forest Service and confirmed with the Forest Service that in fact they did have an easement for that line, when in fact they do not. They don't have an easement and they don't have a special use permit for their 12 kV. So using our document, because we do have an existing special use permit for our power line, we're the district's power line, I call it mine, I own it too, we're using our document and providing that to PG&E, and I'll be providing them some mapping so that they can get a special use permit on file with the Forest Service and be legitimate with their line as well.
Maybe you can add some ITCC and O&M.
Yeah. It's going to be a very expensive map I send them. We've been working with all of our environmental permits, getting our final reports off for Cal Fish and Wildlife, for the Regional Water Quality Board, and for the Army Corps of Engineers. We've sent off all of those permits. There is some ongoing monitoring that we'll have to do for the Fish and Wildlife, and that's once a year for the next 3 years. I'm working with Michael to present a proposal to do that and some other monitoring of the site for the district. And then we're still working on all of the project closeout documentation, having 3 contracts out there. There's quite a bit of paperwork. We've been working with Dick Shanahan on this. I've completed the reconciliation of all the quantities for all of the contracts, with the exception of one item for Q&D, and we'll talk about that a little later on in the agenda. I've worked on a reconciliation with Volcano. We did quite a bit of work jointly with them, And so one of the other items when we talk about the change order, you'll see the magnitude of the work that we did for them. And I've coordinated with them, they're in agreement with my totals, so we're good there. I'm working on getting all of the final waivers from all of the contractors and their subs. We need that before we can file the notice of completion with the project. And so we're still working on all of this. It takes time, as I'm finding out. For a project of this magnitude, it just takes a long time to get all this stuff filed. And I think that's about it.
Great. Any questions from the board? From the public? I don't think there's any staff recommendation on this. It's just an update, right?
Just an update.
Why don't you keep going then? I guess we're on. Thank you, Michelle. That's great. And as I went through the change orders, you know, I saw the $208,000 credit for Volcano, and I assume both of you are working to optimize the district's position within the contracts and having happy contractors like KMPUD, right? Okay, thank you. So do you want to move on to 8A2, Michael?
Yeah, so I'd like to introduce Dick Shanahan, our general counsel. Yeah, either way.
You want to come on up here?
I'll go wherever Michael wants me to go.
Right there is fine.
Right here's fine, okay.
You're perfect. Dick Shanahan has been our general counsel forever, and it's nice to see him up here, and he's going to give a general overview of our project closeout for the project.
Thanks, Michael. It's good to see the directors, and it's nice to be invited up here. I want to congratulate the board and the district on completing this project. From the lawyer's perspective, this went real smooth because I had nothing to do with this project the last 2 years. When the lawyer's involved in a construction project, usually that's not a good thing. My involvement was very heavy before you started construction, but the last 2 years have gone, from my perspective, very smoothly and evidenced by the time of completion of the project, so that's good news. Michael just asked me to talk briefly with the board today about the phase of the project you're moving into, which is sometimes called the project closeout phase. He included in the agenda packet a document called my little cheat sheet, contract closeout and completion checklist, that I've provided to staff as a sort of a menu to follow as you get to this stage of the life of the project. And there's a couple key steps involved in that. The first step is what's happening and have been, the completion of construction, the punch list, the completion of the punch list items, making sure all the regulatory agencies are happy with the construction completion matters. That's happening now. Once that's done and it's happening, then you move into the more administrative side of project closeout, and there's a couple objectives here. This is your last window of opportunity to get things right, settled with the three contractors before you get final payment. That gives you a certain leverage you want to take advantage of. So you want to make sure you got everything you want out of the contractors, both construction-wise as well as non-construction paperwork things. Secondly, it's the time for a good, careful final financial reconciliation to make sure that the contract amounts due and payable, and the final payment calculation, and any credits due to you, and any change order issues are all resolved. And then thirdly, there's just associated paperwork, some of which Michelle referenced in her comments. And what's happening here is, for this particular project, you're actually closing out 3 separate construction projects, so you need to go through this project three separate times with each of the 3 contracts. And things are proceeding well. I'm working with district staff and your engineers, and we're plugging through the process. What makes this project closeout particularly straightforward and simple is there's 2 issues to worry about at the completion of a public works job or any construction job, and that is, do you have any stop notices? And a stop notice is a remedy that subcontractors and suppliers and others can use to leverage a dispute they may have with the prime contractor. And they can file a stop notice and force the district to just cease payment to the prime contractor until the sub or the supplier sorts it out. Thankfully, we don't have any pending stop notices, which make things simple. And then the other issue that can complicate project closeout is do you have any major claims pending with your prime contractor? And that can obviously complicate a project closeout and lead to contentious challenges with the prime contractor. And I guess there's a third issue, which sometimes is relevant, and that is, did the contractor finish late, and are there liquidated damages issues to be assessed, and how are you going to deal with lateness? Thankfully, for these 3 contracts, we really don't have any of those. There's some change order issues that are being sorted out, but they're being sorted out amicably, and that's a fair process, and those are fair change orders. We'll talk about those in a minute. But that process is going well, and that really simplifies it as district staff then rolls into these other things involving the project accounting and getting the waivers and releases that Michelle talked about, and then finally leading up to the time where we can actually file a notice of completion on the project, which is sort of the last document that goes forward, and then we have a little short waiting period, and then the final release to the contractors is made. So things are moving well. Nothing really to report from my perspective in terms of problems or concerns or challenges. So I think the next step of the project should move forward as well. As Michelle indicated, sometimes these things take time, especially when you're dealing with a lot of subs and trying to get releases and things. So, and also you're doing that times 3. So that just is going to take some time. And I'll just pause there and see if any of the directors have questions or comments.
No questions.
I'd say it sounds like a fairly clean project from that perspective.
Yes, from your district council's perspective, it's been a very clean project. You've had a really good team working on it. You were fortunate. It sounds like you selected some good contractors, which isn't always the case with my clients, but you had some good contractors, and that helps a lot.
And when you say it takes time, when would we expect to complete this? 3 months, 6 months?
30, 60 days?
Yeah, we're looking at having everything completely wrapped up, hopefully by the February board meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the time of year you hit holiday delays, so that'll maybe add to the process.
Any questions, comments from the public? So you want to move on to 8A3, Michael?
So this is would be a press release. President O'Grady has
I guess I'm supposed to talk about this.
dropped it. Yes. I was going to kind of lead you into it.
In the package on page 25 and 26 are a first draft press release. You know, it was my idea after talking with Kevin Cooper, at the 50th anniversary, 100th anniversary for the Kirkwood Inn celebration this summer. And it seems to me that this is a major accomplishment for the whole community, not only the PUD, but the resort and the residents. Number one, we certainly spent more money than anybody else has spent in Kirkwood in its history. And secondly, you know, Kirkwood has historically been criticized occasionally, along with a lot of other ski resorts, for being environmentally unfriendly, and this looks like a pretty environmentally friendly project. So we drafted this press release, and the idea is if we can get it to be supported by Vail and distributed through their PR machine, which is vast and extensive, versus ours, which is non-existent, I think, then that would be some good PR for the resort and the community and us and our project. And if we can't get them to agree to it for whatever reason, I think we should probably just put it up on the website, and I'm sure somebody will pick it up because it's a noteworthy news item. And so at this point, I wrote the press release. Michael, Cheryl, and Bob Epstein commented on it, and we'd be interested in any board direction on whether or not to issue it, as well as any comments and also any public input in that regard.
I think it's very nicely written. I certainly commend you for a good job. I would take exception to the last part of the first paragraph where it says that the system has been operating flawlessly since commissioning. I think, you know, perhaps the word like brilliantly might be correct without stating something ain't true.
Near flawlessly.
Well, the
brilliantly,
system itself, it told us where the outage
Yeah, I
was.
mean, it was all brilliant. And nobody else said so, but when Michael made his little report, I mean, hell, what happened yesterday was an absolutely brilliant response to the situation. Kudos to the entire team.
So when I was driving up yesterday, I was thinking about flawlessly might have to change. But as you know, it's a long drive across the valley, so you reconsider that question. And Dave, I mean, do you think the system operated flawlessly, you know, from a design perspective, given that we were hit with a tree?
Yes, it cleared instantly. It opened breakers at the powerhouse to allow, for the automatic starting of the generator, something we hope to have, in effect soon. It did everything, and it cleared things so quickly, even though wires were contacting each other in a tree. There was no sign of any. I've seen where these wires can start kind of welding together as you're waiting for your breaker to trip the power off. But that we knew when we did put the 35 kV protection in, we wanted very, very high speed with a special kind of a line differential system, and it happened very quickly. So as soon as those wires touched, the power was off. I'm going to download some data tomorrow, but we'll know exactly how quickly it was. But it was about 10 to 12 cycles, 10 to 12 60ths of a second.
So I'm not wed to flawless.
I refer to district engineer and withdraw my question.
Oh, that's pretty good. Any other comments from the
Well,
board?
I thought it was, I mean, I was questioning that word flawlessly as well yesterday, but from an engineering perspective, certainly flawlessly is correct.
Michael, any comments?
No, I think the revisions were very good, and I have sent the draft to Casey for his distribution, and we'll be following up with him shortly to find out his failed reaction.
Okay, so is the consensus of the board that we move in the direction of issuing this as long as we can work things out one way or another with Vail? I get-
National to Western perspective.
Yeah. And I sent that around by email last night.
Yeah. You might want to consider spinning it to Aqua Magazine too.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Also, if it is a district publication, our Mountain Democrat, South Tahoe paper, the Tribune, distribute because we get tons of questions. I'm sure members of the community get tons of questions about, really, are you guys really online?
Yeah, I get those questions too. And so why don't we move in the direction of issuing it to those people, whether Vail wants to or not? And is it okay if we have the final text approved by the general manager and the president?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Absolutely. I'd like to make sure that we give this to large population centers, whether Vail likes to do it or not. And, obviously, our customer base is drawing from Sacramento and San Francisco. And we certainly want to make sure that the large newspapers and media outfits in those markets were alerted. They might want to make a nice story out of it. That would be good for us.
Well, then why don't we move in that direction, see how we can get noticed in those markets if Vail decides not to want to issue it for whatever reason.
Yeah, I'm sure there's clearinghouses where we can post this and they can pick up things like this. And I think it's huge news, and I think San Francisco and Sacramento would want to know.
Yeah. But if we can work nicely with Vail, that'd be a good thing too. So moving on to 8D. Sorry.
So when the fire took place at the powerhouse, a number of years ago, the media came out. Do we have any idea who those media representatives were? There was print as well as broadcast media, because those would be people that obviously could see the whole story from
Yeah, it's
burned
a
down
really good
to-
point. Was KTVN at Sacramento?
I don't really remember, but, there's enough, those are other outlets that you could try
Yeah, that's
to,
good.
and, entice with this press release.
Absolutely. 5 years ago, we had this, now we have this.
Right.
So 8B, discussion and possible approval of change orders. Great, we have a long list.
Michelle's going to go over the change orders that we have today.
All right, we'll start with, the first one is from Exponential Engineering. And this is a change order for some additional coordination with AT&T and PG&E regarding all the issues we had with the T1 circuit. And then the additional work that we found out was required for the NetGate service and all the coordination that had to happen. So Dave Wrightley is here to answer any more detailed questions about what's all included in this. This is a total change order for $23,400.
You should go through all of them.
Oh, and all of them, okay, great.
Well, actually, what I'd appreciate is just an indication of whether or not staff thinks that these are reasonable at this point.
Yeah, I was gonna
If there's any
comment.
discussions.
So do we have questions for this now or later?
I was going to have Michelle go through the list, and she's going to concentrate on number 5.
Okay.
And then do questions and then staff recommendations.
This project has The second one is a quantities reconciliation for the substation contract. There were 3 quantities that changed over what we anticipated in the bid, and that's reflected here. These are actual installed quantities. This one totals $25,889.82. The next one is for $90,665.42. This is for a list of additional work items. On the second page, there is a list. I'll start out talking about items 1, 2, and 3. These are items that we've had numerous discussions here with the board on. This was for some rock and concrete excavation up at KMPUD as well as moving the switchgear pad from the original location outside over by the transformer inside. So we talked about this, many, many months ago. We have been negotiating with Wilson Construction, going back and forth on what we thought was appropriate and what they thought was appropriate. We finally came up with agreement. There were a couple items that were rolled into this, not only moving the reactor pad inside, or the reactor inside, but there was some rock excavation. There was some C-channel that we needed to add and some galvanizing. And when you look at this number, the 32,000, we actually had 2 items, 2 deducts off of that. So the 61,6458 is a deduct, and the 10,476 is a deduct. When you take all of those items together, I wanted to be able to give the board the actual cost of that move of the switchgear. We talked about that early on in the project. So the total cost of moving that was actually $2,545.17, which I think is about what Dave had presented to the board it was going to be. The additional costs with those first 3 items deal primarily with the rock excavation, and then when they were, like I said, the C-channel, and then when they were excavating inside the powerhouse, they found some of the old, there was a concrete footing that was used for some of the false work when they were actually constructing the powerhouse, and they just covered it up with dirt. We had to get rid of that so that we could construct our foundation. So that's the balance of that. Item number 4, this was additional cost from Wilson for the repair of the 115 breaker at the KMPUD substation. This is a cost that we're going after Alstom to get back, so that $900 should be reimbursed back to the district. Item 5 is for some additional testing that was required from Emerson. As we were moving through the project, we had to have them come out on site again and do some additional testing of some of the equipment. We had item 6, there was some fiber optic material that was originally listed on the bid documents as owner furnished. It was not included with the owner furnished material, and we had to have the contractor purchase that, so that's strict materials cost there. Item 7, that deals with the backup station service. When they were installing that underground cable from our drop pole for the 12 kV over to the new transformer, they actually they hit rock, of all things, up there, and they had to bring a specialized piece of equipment on site to do the rock. And then the final item is the additional labor and materials to perform for the cable swap up at KMPUD.
There seems to be a little confusion here between what's on the agenda part of the board packet and where you're taking your items off from, and I'm lost.
This is all included in item 3,
Okay.
so that $90,000 item.
Subsets of item 3.
Correct. Item 3 was the $90,000, and then on the paperwork that's included in the board packet, there's a summary of all the items that are included in there. Instead of doing individual change orders for each one of those items, we had them all at once, so we lumped them together. Does that make sense? I apologize for confusing you. Item 4 is the Q&D construction quantities reconciliation, and that is in the amount of $41,307.75. I provided Michael, and I believe it's in your board packet, a summary of the quantities reconciliation. Again, this goes through and reconciles the actual linear feet of conduit and cable and different items, all the items that were included. This also includes a deduct that the district will see back, the reimbursement for the volcano work that was done. So when you subtract that out, the total ends up being the $41,307.75.
Versus 37,307 on the
So,
agenda.
yeah, it
Oh,
is-
I
Sorry.
apologize. Yeah, there was, I had an error in what I had originally sent Michael. There was a $4,000 error. I forgot to add in one last little component of cable, so. And then the last item is the final cost for the mill and overlay. This is for the additional work that Q&D had to do due to Caltrans requiring us to be in the roadway instead of in the shoulder as we had planned. So the total additional square footage was 138,904 square feet of mill and overlay that we had to do. There was, that total cost was $291,698.40. We negotiated a credit back from Q&D for $23,500, which dropped that cost down to the $268,198.40. And I believe included in the packet is also some correspondence back and forth from Q&D. And so with that, I'd like to answer any questions you have.
Any questions from, anything else you want to say at this point, Michael?
Yeah, so staff has reviewed these change orders, and I would like to concentrate on number 5.
Welcome to the conference call. Please, at the tone, please record your name for announcement to the call organizer, and then press the pound key to enter your conference.
Kirkwood PUD.
You will now enter the conference. The subscriber has not subscribed. Please enter your...
Yeah. Thank you. Staff has reviewed these change orders in detail and especially concentrated on number 5. This was a original bill that came in over $311,000. We've negotiated that down with the contractor Q&D. Our negotiating point isn't with regards to the work that was performed on the mill and overlay. Our negotiation was the location of the conduit and the culvert issue that we've addressed in the past. So we were looking for a credit back due to the liability that the district would suffer due to this issue. And I think Q&D has come forth and not only has pointed out issues where they have already given the district allowances for over and above work, but they've also issued a $23,500 credit. So district staff did meet with them several times on this. I wanted to bring this back up and comment on it, but district staff has reviewed and recommends approval of all of these change orders in the amount of $445,461.
Any questions from the board or comments?
Just on the overall impact on our costs, a number of those, or a certain amount of those, were already anticipated in the construction cost summaries that we've been seeing previously.
Yes, in fact, the majority of the costs that we're talking about here have already been anticipated. We anticipated $273,000 from Q&D, and the amount is $268,000, so we're pretty close on that. We also anticipated some of the Wilson rock work that she mentioned in the substation amount. So the overall impact is that the Out Valley cost summary, which you'll see on the next slide, actually has gone up by $71,000 over what you saw last time, because we had already anticipated change orders in these amounts.
Great, thanks.
I guess my one question I'll direct it at Dave is your change order. I'm not contesting it at all, but $23,000 seems like a lot for communications kinds of things. I know there was a lot of activity that went around, but maybe that went on for those things to happen, both on the Cal-ISIS circuit and the T1. But what was involved with that? I mean, I sort of think about when I call up the phone company and say, please install DSL circuit, it takes about 15 minutes. I know that wasn't the case.
That $23,000 charge is all man-hours charge. There's no expenses, no labor in there. It was whether or not we were at our offices in Colorado or we were here. The fact that PG&E, out of the blue, said we have to have the T1 now. It was, the The T1 was something that was going to be good for them, that they could get it in service and get it to work, but it became a critical item because they then said, we cannot finish our end-to-end testing. They did not prepare for or understand the communications at Green. And that's part of the question, part of the problem, and that created a lot of priority on our side to continue coordinating, getting these circuits done. But I will say that it is very time-consuming and frustrating dealing with AT&T. There were hundreds of phone calls with AT&T, very different people within AT&T getting different answers. That was a lot of it. Also, there's a number of things lumped in here because also involved was queso stuff. We had been providing support for the district staff to find out about how queso was going to do this, and we were not getting a clear answer. We were finding 500-page manuals about how to get connected to queso and have them read your meter. Finally, when we were able to have a meeting with the people that could clarify it, we discovered we needed this Netgate service. And unfortunately, it only comes from AT&T. We were already dealing with AT&T on the T1. That added a number of quite a few hours of time in dealing with them on the Netgate, including even things like not properly having the modem provision here at the powerhouse. We had ordered it, we filled out all the forms, Sandy's supporting us, and the thing comes and I'm suspecting there's something not right. It was fortunate that I was here, and when I finally got on the phone, they tell me, somebody from Connecticut says, that's not provisioned. Can you do this? And so even additional charges of me actually plugging my computer into their modem with them on the phone and provisioning their modems. So it just turned out to be a lot of man hours in back and forth with PG&E, back and forth with AT&T, and back and forth with Cal ISO. And there's some other stuff in here I mentioned briefly. We learned that the district needs to have their meter certified for Cal ISO. So we provided these services to find a contractor for the district called Trimark. And then we coordinated, in fact, we were there at Green with them to bring them in, show them what they needed. I was getting them data so they could certify the meter.
Okay, thank you. And so you're saying it's man hours based and you're satisfied with it?
More than satisfied. It was a crazy 6-week period, and it all had to do with communications between Cal ISO, between AT&T, and between PG&E. And we would not have energized without Exponential's help.
Okay. So at this point, I'll open up to the public for any comments, input, questions. And I think you've already made your recommendation. Somebody like to make a motion to approve these change orders?
Sure, I'll move to approve. I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So it passes unanimously. Moving on to 8C, continued discussion and possible action regarding a current out valley cost estimate. Is this, we're in the same place, right, in terms of your PowerPoint and stuff?
Yes, we are. So in your packet on page 36, you'll see the most current out valley cost estimate, which I mentioned. The only change in these estimates has been the changes in the change order. Jill, did you have any comment, or is that basically it?
That's it.
Yeah.
Highlighted in yellow.
Michael, what risk, the PG&E line is still red. What is that risk?
As far as financial or potential risks, our final construction costs with PG&E have to be trued up. We have an actual series. We hope that we've identified all those costs and nothing surprises us as they surprised us in the past. That's a financial risk. We have the costs for these station service costs that is going in right now. We don't know what PG&E's final cost on the station service work would be. That would be a risk. ITCC costs, as far as 22 or 34%, that is still bouncing around Congress at this time, actually. And Dick actually just updated us on that. And finally, we have underground slurry reconciliation, which maybe Michelle can address.
Sure. With the slurry quantity, we had, of course, a bid unit based on where we thought we were going to put the power line. We had some additional areas. Anywhere that we were within a roadway prism, we actually slurried over the power line. And then we had some areas where if we encountered rocks and our excavation got wider, we used more slurry. And so I had calculated out an estimate of what I thought we should have had. I received information back from Q&D saying what they actually installed in the ground, and they're not close at this point. Q&D also had indicated that we had agreed with them early on in the project that they dug a wider trench for contractor ease, and so we have backed out that additional trench, and Q&D and I both agree to that. We still have a little bit of, I should say, not a little bit, we still have a significant gap in what I think it should be and versus what they think it should be. And so I've asked them for the tickets by date, because I need to go back and look at all of our inspection reports and look at all of our documentation to be able to justify my position or agree to their position and come up with an agreement. So we're looking at, it could be, right now the range I have to say is somewhere between the bid price and about $176,000. So it's going to be somewhere in that range, and I won't know until I've looked at those tickets and can go back and make my justification back to them.
Is that number in this spreadsheet at all, or is that not in the spreadsheet?
That would not be in the spreadsheet.
And on the ITCC, what we're assuming is that 34% will be a charge rather than 22%.
Well, that's my question on this, which is either now or perhaps at the next meeting, if you don't have it now. What are we paying ITCC tax in here for? Meaning, I think when we got through that revised interconnection agreement, I think or hope that, I know we're paying it on that pole number 1, but I think we're not paying it on the cable from pole number 1 through all the other poles to KM Green that were going to be PG&E's, but now hopefully will be ours. And I think when we were going through the discussions, and it's what's in the contract, the interconnection, is that we're not going to be paying ITCC on the switchgear in Tiger Creek and Salt Springs until we get to version 3 of the interconnection agreement. Am I wrong in that? I think I'm right on that. So the question is, what are we paying ITCC tax on?
Sure, so ITCC will be trued up in 2015, and it'll be based on current rates, whatever and I think it actually will be retroactive if we go through a phase 3 on the interconnection. But right now, phase 2 has ITCC on the pole number 1. It has it on the miscellaneous $100,000 worth of KM Green equipment and on the improvements at Tiger Creek and Salt Springs substations. So those 3 things are in our current agreement. However, we have the ability with phase 3 to true up those numbers based on, what changes with phase number 3, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. One of our strategies with our phase number 2, our current interconnection true up, is that we're going to pose the argument that we should not be responsible for 100% of the improvements to the Salt Springs and Tiger Creek upgrades, because we're responsible for the construction costs, but the O&M costs of those should only be the portion that's added onto their protection, which is our KM Green. It shouldn't be the amount that was already being protected between Salt Springs and Tiger Creek. So we shouldn't have to pay for their protection between, because that was already existing. It's just like the 12 kV line, and which PG&E agreed to. We don't have to maintain or pay a cost to maintain their 12 kV because it already existed. We shouldn't have to pay for their O&M on the protection between these 2 sites.
So then we definitely pay it on pole number 1, which they keep. We don't pay it on the other poles and cable. And right now, we're assuming we're paying it on the KM Green switchgear upgrade, Tiger Creek, and Salt Springs, but we have the ability to reverse that, maybe.
Yes. Absolutely correct.
So any other questions from the board or comments?
Well, I just one. So PG&E has not invoiced us since March of 2013?
That is correct. They did send us an invoice. Actually, it's incorrect. They sent us an invoice. We asked for backup.
That was last November.
and they, well, just recently, they sent us an invoice. We couldn't tie into their numbers. We asked for backup with that, for that amount. And they suggested that we wait until January 15 to supply that backup and do that during the entire true-up, which I didn't think the district had a problem with.
No, I'd be happy to pay them later.
Exactly, so, but you're absolutely correct.
Any questions, comments from the public on 8C1, which is overall project costs and potential risks? So this is mainly an update item. There's no action you're looking for. And then if it's okay with you, since Alan joined, can we leap ahead and do agenda item 8G? Welcome, Alan. This is Standish O'Grady. We're glad to have you with us here.
Thank you.
Michael, I think you start this off, right?
Yeah, let me, I'll do. So, as the board knows, the district has been looking at alternative calculations to formulate our capital connection charges. We have, currently we have a pretty standard method where we calculate what our improvements are and build them against the people that are coming in for capacity-related capital connection charges. Director Rickard has come up with a buy-in fee, and the board looked at that and decided that we should have a third party take a look at this buy-in fee and come up with a possible alternative. The board authorized the hiring of Alan Zelinka with Kennedy Jenks, who has completed that study and is here today to review that. And Alan, I have your PowerPoint up on the first page. So this is Alan Zelinka.
I see that. I'm streaming your meeting as well.
How do we look?
So, you guys look great. So if you go to the next slide, Michael. So nice to be in front of the board again. If you recall, we worked together and you hired Kenny Jenks to look at rate design when you first started up the electric side of the PUD. And just as a background, I come from the electric utility industry and electric power manager for electric utility, but now work for Kenny Jenks. It's a private consulting firm. Next slide. The purpose of the analysis was to review the existing capital connection fee that you have, basically what you're doing today, and then assess the new proposed buy-in fee structure that was proposed by Director Reichert, and then look if there's other alternatives, and then make a recommendation to you all. When we did this, we brought it to the Finance Committee earlier this week. So what we're going to, next slide please, Michael. What we're going to do is look at some of the background and assumptions that we have put into this analysis, and look at how your current rate treatment works, how the buy-in fee works, and how an alternative buy-in fee proposal would work. Next slide, please, Michael. On the background and assumptions, the Out Valley project, as you are all well aware, has a total capital cost of $37.6 million, but then you take the capacity allocation off and the PUD allocation off, and you end up with $33.5 million of remaining capital costs that's collected through rates, and that's what's used in this analysis, not the entire amount. Next slide, please, Michael. The bond, actually, when we simplified it for this analysis, there's actually several bond instruments that have varying lengths and varying interest terms, but to get at this at a conceptual level, we simplified it to a 35-year bond at 3%, which generated an annual debt service of about $1.585 million. And your depreciation schedule, which I think is about 36 years, we simplified that to 35-year straight line depreciation. So you're actually annually collecting through rates about $956,000 ostensibly for the rebuild of the project over time. So our estimate that the life of the facilities is 35 years, although, as Commissioner Reichert points out, it'll actually last longer than that. But for this analysis, what we did was we calculated it based on what the bond term was in the depreciation schedule. The accountants would probably balk at saying it's a 60-year life, given that the depreciation at 35 and the bonds at 35. So we used the 35-year life as the life of the facilities. Next slide, please, Michael. The other concept that's important for this analysis is the equivalent dwelling unit, so it comes out of your master plan. And currently you have 1,239 dwelling units, and it's split between residential EDUs, equivalent dwelling units, and resort EDUs for the total of 1,239. The master plan says you can only build out maximum EDUs to 2,777, 2,777. And assuming the same proportions and just forecasting them forward at a growth rate of 2.5%, you get to that 2,777 in the 34 years, coincidentally almost exactly the same as the depreciation life and the bond term. So in year 34, there are no new customers that come online. They've all, you've reached your maximum EDU from the master plan. Next slide, please, Michael. The way the current connection fee works is that all of the debt service, the $1.6 million, is collected through rates, and that debt service amount is fixed and flat over that 35-year period in this analysis. And if you graph out what the average annual cost is for the benefit of the Out Valley project for any customer, based on what year they come in onto the system, that's the graph that you see at the bottom of the screen. So the customer that comes on, that's already on the system in year one, pays an average of about $868, and it goes down over time. And so, and what Commissioner or Director Reichert noticed, and which I think is true, is because of that downward sloping line, the average annual cost that any customer pays, the ratepayers the customers that come online to your system in the out years of this analysis are paying a lot less than the existing current customers. So they're paying substantially less than in the years 25 to 30 on average per year for the same benefit that they get from the Out Valley project. And it's this inequity that we were trying to, that Director Reichert was trying to address. Next slide, please. Michael. This is just to show you that we created these spreadsheets to be able to analyze this and calculate this. And there's a spreadsheet for each of the different options that we're looking at. Next slide, please. So in trying to correct for that inequity that Director Reichert noticed, is that the premise should be that the new customers in the out years shouldn't pay less than the current customers for the same benefit from the same project. So injecting a buy-in fee would attempt to then equalize the playing field, if you will, and collect by collecting that upfront payment, so that you try to level the playing field for paying for the benefit of the Out Valley project, the same project. So, but the debt service would still be continued to collect it through rates. So in that analysis that Director Reichert did, he assumed a 60-year life of facilities based on some engineering advice, and that's based on the total debt service. It's also based on total debt service paid out over 35 years, but he figured that the life of the facilities would be 60 years, so he divided the amount of debt that a customer would pay over their life of using the facility. So if you're in year one, you pay 35 years worth of debt, and that would amount to $30,000, and you divide by 60, you would get $506. That's called the unit buy-in fee. And in order to establish that buy-in fee, in the first year you would charge, $0, but in the second year you would charge $506, and then the next year you would charge $1,012, and then next year we'll charge triple the buy-in fee, and so on and so on, and as you progress over time. So each year you added a new unit of buy-in fee, and so the unit buy-in fee is a fixed number that gets added, and so over time it would the cost per EDU would vary over time. Next slide, please, Michael. So the buy-in fee does in fact reverse that inequity of the current rating treatment, but it did it kind of imperfectly. It actually ends up raising the average annual cost of benefit from the Out Valley project in those out years in the last several years. So what we did was we then said, well, if you go to the next slide, please, Michael. We looked at an alternative buy-in fee with the goal, same goal of trying to achieve equity between the current and the future customers on their average annual cost of the benefits they receive from the Out Valley project. So the metric is everybody should pay the same average cost for the benefit that they get from the project if they come on in year 1 or if they come on in year 34. And again, there's no new customers after year 34. So then the graph that we just showed you, the one that sloped down to the right for the existing one or slightly up to the right for the proposed buy-in fee, what we're trying to do is then try to make that graph flat. And so the problem would be then to solve for the buy-in fee so that the average cost for the future and the current customers was the same. Next slide, please. So the methodology for calculating the annual buy-in fee actually changed. So the buy-in fee is not fixed any longer. It's actually variable. And what we kept constant was the average annual cost, so it would get a flat graph. And so for all the EDUs, regardless of the year they come online, the average annual cost would be the same, but the average annual fee would vary depending on what it needed to be to get to that flat average annual cost. Next slide, please. So when you look at the graph, the formula that we use to calculate the alternative buy-in fee actually creates a level playing field, and that level playing field assumed that the average annual cost, regardless of what year you came online into the system, would be $868 per EDU. And so the trick was, how do you calculate for what the buy-in fee should be? Next slide, please. When we did this, it really changed the methodology or the thinking about how you calculate the buy-in fee to enable to get to that flat graph. In the first proposed buy-in fee, it added a unit of buy-in fee, and it's doubled it, tripled it, quadrupled it, and so on and so on. So you got this graph that goes up and to the right substantially, so that in year 35 you're paying like almost $18,000 in a buy-in fee up front, so that it would equal to the same debt service that the customers in year 1 paid in. When we changed the methodology to try to get a flat average annual cost graph, it actually made the buy-in fee variable over time, and so that you ended up collecting enough to get to the same $868 annual cost. And when you do that, you see that parabola type graph on the bottom right. And also, it's important to note that the collection of the amount that's collected is substantially less with the alternative buy-in fee, $3.5 million versus almost $15 million for the proposed buy-in fee. And so, just next slide, please. And just quickly, one of the things you should know is that legal tells us that the buy-in fee needs to be used on capital projects. And while it starts out small at $13,000 for the alternative buy-in fee, actually by the year 20, it's up to $150,000. And when you use that to displace capital that you would, or rate money that you would use for your CIP, you actually end up lowering rates anyway, and that's equitable for everybody. So, next slide, please, to the recommendation slide. So our recommendation was that you consider this alternative buy-in fee, but you needed to do a little bit more analysis in order to verify it and go beyond just the simple calculations that we did in a short period of time. Some of the assumptions we just took from staff and put them into the model. They need to be verified and confirmed, and staff would be able to do that. But then you'd also want to look at what happens if the growth rate changes over time. What happens to the alternative buy-in fee? What happens if you added inflation and try to change and look at that? And then of course you have a variable multi instrument debt service associated with this project. So we actually kind of put in the actual debt service schedule into the model and see what happens to it. And that kind of sensitivity analysis will allow you to see what it's a little bit more in depth, a little bit more complicated, but it also is a better look at what's actually happening. The policy issues are for the board to tackle with that we identified were that there is a potential negative impact of a development fee on future EDUs if you're making it by a buy-in fee. Whether or not that's negative or even substantially negative is a policy question. And then what would be the existing customers and future customers' reaction to that? But those are political questions that we didn't go into. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Michael and answer any questions you have about what we did and how we accomplished that. Alternative line.
Jeez. That was Kelly, everyone.
Actually, before you go, I put this on the agenda as an imperfect work in progress. And since you're the person sort of driving this, even though we considered the Finance Committee meeting earlier this week, and frankly, there are a number of things I didn't understand, I thought we should bring it forward here for public consideration of a work in progress, an unfinished project. So that's why it's here, even though you don't consider it fully baked. Is there anything else you'd like to add at this point?
Yeah, well, I'd like to open up to questions to Alan. I do have a final recommendation.
Okay. Well, I've got a number of questions for Alan, but do you have any?
Well, I spoke with Alan yesterday or the day before and asked a couple of questions. But for me, I'll just tell you, I think that there are two alternative approaches here. One is the one that I originally came up with. I think Alan's analysis was a very good analysis. I think it was a very creative way of going about trying to achieve the same thing. So I think it's definitely a possibility. But I just want to go back to the beginning when I started thinking about this, because it's all tied into the fact that A, we want to pay off our debt. We don't want to refinance and renew the debt continually so that everybody's paying debt from now until eternity. And the second is that Russ requires us to collect fees for depreciation, in our rates, the cost of depreciation. And I know some of that will be used for reducing rates, but the reality is that people coming into the system in later years are going to get a very good use of a very good system, and they're going to see all the benefits that we see. And it just seems to me that everybody should pay their fair share for the benefits that they're getting. So with all the depreciation that we're collecting in cash, the fact that we've got O&M in the rate schedule, in our rates and so on, I think it's easily going to be 60 years of benefit. And I talked to Dave Rightly about that. There's no reason why this system won't last more than that if we use the cash that we're collecting to replace transformers and switches and lines that come down and so on. There's no reason to think that the system is going to deteriorate over 35 years. I know there's an accounting point of view, but I still think that we should be looking at the 60 years of benefit. That's the major thing that I can't get over as far as Alan's analysis is the 35 years of benefit is in a way for calculation. So, but I think his analysis is very good and certainly an option.
So, there are a number of things I don't understand about it, but we're all getting the benefit of 60 years. So those of us that start at day one are getting 35 years where we're paying it off, plus the following 25 years.
Correct. Correct.
And then number two, the person coming in the last year, year 34 or whatever, I think he's trying to calculate an average annual cost that's fair to him as well as, or her, as well as us.
That's right. But what happens is that, that they will be paying, that person, that entity coming in year 34 or 35 will pay $848 for 25 years of benefit, which comes out to be about $18 a year for all the benefits, whereas those of us right now will pay an average of a little over $500 per year for each of our 60 years of benefit. That's the
Right.
disconnect.
Right.
I mean, it's so if the calculation takes into account that some of us will have 60 years of benefit and others will have 2 years of benefit. That's taken into account. And it's that gap. So, you know,
60
in
versus
35
27.
years, maybe I don't care. Maybe I'm not going to.
I guarantee you.
I won't even know how to feed myself. But, you know, it doesn't seem right that since we're collecting depreciation, since we're doing a good job of O&M, since the intent is to keep this system viable and working flawlessly through all these years, since that's the intent, I don't understand why a person coming in year 34 or 35 would only pay $18 per year of benefit that they'll gain, whereas those of us or our successors in our homes will be paying an average of $500 and something per year of benefit. That's the gap that I'm trying to close.
At this point, before we go there, well, actually, Alan, go ahead. You were on the finance committee. You've studied the spreadsheet, I'm sure.
Yeah, Alan Sapp. As an economist, I love assumptions, and there's a couple of assumptions in here that I just can't buy. And the first one is that we're going to be built out in 35 years. You know, we're a little over 40 years old now, and we're not even halfway there. And without much investment in the foreseeable future in this resort, I don't see us getting built out by 35 years from now. The second one is the one that really made me stop and say, okay, I think Director Rickert has a point here in how to equitably do this, and that's the 60-year life. If I look at, can you go back 2 slides to the one with the double graphs on it? Now, what this slide doesn't show is that in year 30, Eric's line starts decreasing, so that the payment goes down for the next 30 years. So at 60, somebody coming on year 59 pays a very small fee. If we're trying to do this to eliminate the inequity between what we all today are paying versus somebody coming in later, we've got a $35 million system here, and we're going to collect $3.5 million in fees to do away with that inequity. That doesn't make sense to me. And I think by using a longer life, and perhaps the graph doesn't have to be as steep as Eric's, but certainly not as low as Alan's. There's got to be something in the middle to collect more than $3.5 million over the next 60 years for the benefit of the people coming on. My point.
Any questions or comments from the board?
No, the finance committee looked at this. The purpose was just to sort of get a sense of whether there is an inequity that we should address. That was the number one thing we discussed in the meeting, and we all reached the conclusion there is an inequity. And then the next step was to discuss it here and then do sensitivity analysis and decide what are the major variables. I mean, the other thing in this is it assumes all units are equivalent. And so that drastically favors the large units. You know, anything that's a flat fee benefits, you know, the commercial and the resort and disadvantages the residences. So the goal here was not to fine tune it, but just to sort of say, can we characterize it? And I think it's properly characterized. And I do agree with you that the 35-year point would say that, you know, well, we're all done paying for it, and the goal is just to handle the payments and not to think about the useful lifetime behind it.
Any other comments, questions from the audience? Dick?
Yeah, as long as I'm here, I thought I'd chime in on this. And Alan on the phone, you don't know me, but I'm Dick Shanahan, district general counsel, and I think this is a good concept, so I look forward to working with the district moving forward on it. In California, you need to be very careful about calculation of developer fees and connection charges, because we have a long history in the state of litigation between local agencies and developers, and as a consequence, it's also heavily regulated by the state in terms of the do's and the don'ts. And coincidentally, this issue came up, let me back up. The type of fee you're talking about for a connection fee or developer fee, we don't have a lot of these in California. We're starting to see more and more of them. And they're starting to be more accepted by the courts, which is a good thing. The norm you see in California is the way you do your sewer and water charges, where you have a list of capital improvements, and you figure out what they cost, and you spread those costs over new development. That's kind of the norm for calculating these kind of charges, and this buy-in fee approach is a little different, but is accepted by the courts. One thing on terminology is I would shy away from the phrase buy-in. A straight buy-in charge because you think it's fair and equitable is the courts are going to frown on that, so you don't want to develop an administrative record of buy-in. The phrase used in California you'll see is standard-based methodology. I don't know, I'm not sure where that phrase came from, but that's what you'll see. If you were to Google fee, standard-based method or something, you'll see a lot of rate studies where they come up with. This was an issue in some legislation in California in 2006 in a bill somewhat related to this, but the legislature had kind of a tag on in this one bill, and the bill acknowledges that, however, the fees, it's a developer fee bill, but it's analogous to connection charges. Developer fees may include costs attributable to the increased demand for public facilities reasonably related to the development project in order to, 1, refurbish existing facilities to maintain the existing level of service, or 2, achieve an adopted level of service that is consistent with the general plan. What you'll see in there is this level of service concept, and that's actually kind of where the standard comes from. Is it's the level of service standard, and where you see it a lot in California are like park fees and library fees and things like that. Where, well, this is our goal of parks and this is our goal for fire and whatnot. For electricity, it's a little different, but I think you can do it. But the challenge is, and the methodology worked up here can get you there, but the challenge is coming up with a level of service equivalent. That here's our level of service, our level of electricity service for an EDU, this is what it costs. And if you want to build here, you got to pay for that to replace that level of service. So it's got to be kind of a level of service-based analysis. A lot of it's just terminology, and you kind of work that into your rate study. But that's what you need to develop towards, is this level of service cost per EDU. And following up on Director Epstein, that's a detail point. With electricity, you need to give some careful thought to, because with water and sewer, the EDU concept I think fits and it works well. It's got a good model. Electricity, a little different, because electricity usage between a single-family dwelling unit and commercial and apartment and what, they're going to be different. So you need to think about what's an appropriate electricity unit of service going forward, figure out what the cost of that level of service is to maintain, and then work in this direction. So I think it's a good direction, but we've got a few things we need to kind of package it to make sure we package it to fit what we see here in California for this standard-based fee methodology. So we're seeing more of it, so but you don't see a lot of it in California.
Any other comments, questions, input from the public? I have a recommendation, but
I do have one question, because Alan has brought it up both in my conversation with him as well as in this presentation, and that is, keying the analysis to the 35-year term of debt and the term of depreciation. And maybe, Howard, maybe you've got insights into this. Is that something that we have to pay close attention to? Or is that, clearly we are going to depreciate our asset over that period of time from an accounting perspective. In the meantime, we're also going to be probably bringing new assets into the system over a period of time, and so the asset base won't go down to zero. But, is that from an accounting perspective, or Dick, from a legal perspective, is that something that says the 60-year idea is nice, Dave is right, it's gonna last, but you can't pay attention to that. Or can we pay attention to the 60 years? Do you know?
For purposes of calculating your connection charge, yes, you may. It's sort of a kind of an apples and oranges, question, but yeah, USDA, when you shouldn't have anything to say with respect to how you choose to calculate your connection charges to pass on to new development moving forward. They're more concerned about the rates and charges that existing users pay.
There has been a few systems that have begun looking at something called a capacity factor. Capacity factor addresses exactly the point that Bob addresses, is you look at your relative size of load relative to the system as a whole. You look at the amount of plant that's required to serve the system as a whole, excluding new consumer connects, and then allocate that based on what is on the books. So there are a few states where capacity factors are part of line connection costs over and above that which is directly required to connect the consumer. So you've got the cost to directly connect, and then you require any new consumer to pay a part of the capacity required based on the investment to serve the system. But then it's going to still get depreciated over whatever period of time, and then thereafter, that part of the analysis is gone. So.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Michael, any other recommendations this morning?
Yeah, so this meeting has brought up several questions, many questions. How long of a period of time the useful life should be? Should it be tied into the 35 years, the 60 years? How is an EDU calculated? The specific plan doesn't actually have the number 2,777. It has the number 1,413. We've used 40% of that as the commercial base because that's how much they are today. Is that a good methodology for calculating the commercial, or should there be an EDU system where you say, as we do in water, average residential usage divided into a commercial usage equals an EDU, and you charge that commercial usage based on their intended flow. So there's a whole bunch of questions. I think the board has several paths they can go. They can send it back to committee to try to refine what these assumptions are to determine. They can send it back to Alan Zelinka and I with the direction to work with the finance committee to answer some of these questions and come up with a revised proposal. At this point, staff recommends that it goes back to committee.
Finance committee?
Yes.
I have a question. When this topic first came up, I recall that EID used to charge a standby fee on undeveloped property that would be paid annually, like your property taxes. Has the committee abandoned researching that completely as an alternative?
Yeah, of course, I'm not on that committee, but it was one of the
That's
very
no
original.
longer legal?
Well, let me answer it real quick. It's legal, but after Prop 218, standby charges are a type of assessment, and new assessments can only be approved by a majority of the affected property owners.
I see.
So you would need the property owners to agree to assess themselves to pay the standby
Okay.
charge.
Okay, got it.
You want to do that, Pete?
It's worth a
So
shot.
you can try.
Good luck with that.
Well, the advantage of that was that you collect
Yeah.
the money up front
Yes.
in small increments rather than penalizing somebody with a huge payment that you're going to collect later.
They
Prop
used to be a
218
good
changed
tool,
all
but
that.
Prop 218
Okay.
kind of took that away.
Okay.
So the
That
election
seems
has
right.
to be just from amongst the owners of the undeveloped property?
Of whoever the assessed land would be, yeah, and whoever you're proposing
So
to
yeah,
levy.
218.
So it's undeveloped property.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, you're looking for a consensus on direction, I think. And I think the consensus is to send it back to the finance committee to work with you and Alan Zelinka. Is that acceptable, fair?
Yeah, I would just, because there's never been a formal statement of any kind, that the direction, as Bob said, the finance committee agreed that there is some action needed, something that should be done.
Right.
But that has never been actually stated by the board. It's just been my idea, talking to you guys and taking it to the finance committee. Are we ready to say that whatever we may want to call it, the standard methodology calculation fee, is something that we want to pursue. Obviously, when the public would need to be heard from, and in the end, we may or may not adopt it. But is this just a science project at this point, or is it something more serious?
I would say it's more serious.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not ready to say that we should do it, but I think we should flesh it out.
I think our statement should be that there's an inequity in how people are paying for the long-term level of service and capacity that we'd like to address.
And I guess the conceptual comment I'd make on that graph there, those two graphs, is I worry about yours being too aggressive, as Alan said, because in year 20 or 25, development may be prohibitive. Conversely, I worry about the parabola, because number one, I don't understand it. And number two, if you just factor in, you know, the biggest economic threat in the world, inflation, it should be like Alan said, and that is something in between, I would think.
No, just so you know, I agree. I mean, this was a calculation based on, you know, the data as I understood it. I always understood that we may want to say, hey, but by way of policy, because we don't want to discourage development, we may say, by policy, we want something less than that. But, so I agree with that.
And my gut would be that we want a graph in between the two, because, you know, just 2% inflation, which is at all of our rates except for one, is a reality. I mean, inflation is a big long-term factor.
Yeah, for our purposes, just say, because this is, the way it's being analyzed now is tied to our debt, and our debt isn't subject to inflation. I haven't included inflation in this. But what is fact is that $15,000 in year 30 isn't $15,000 today. It's something like $8,000 or something, the equivalent.
Alan, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to recap a couple of the things I heard today. One is that we should be looking at this perhaps on a square foot basis as opposed to a unit basis. Another one is I heard roughly a 40% build out. We're roughly 40 years old. That kind of implies the other 60% might take 60 years. And again, between those two graphs, perhaps there's an algorithm that we can have an increasing fee for the next 10, 15 years, and then instead of a decreasing fee, a flat fee for the next 45 years, just to ensure that we raise something more than half of today's cost of the system.
I guess I would say that I would expect it to take several meetings, several months, and that we should report back from the Finance Committee to the board periodically during that period.
Yeah, I mean, I think my original goal was to have something in place by July, by the new fiscal year. And then that would be year one, or year one.
That seems reasonable to me unless...
Michael, I have a comment when appropriate.
Please.
One other way to think about this is and the way that I thought about it was, what is the metric you're going to use to assess whether or not this is equitable? So how are you going to, what's the metric? Are you going to use the total amount money that they paid and over the life of the facility, or, and that's kind of what Director Reichert did, which was take all the debt service that they're going to pay, and that over that 60-year period, everybody should pay out an equal amount. The alternative buy-in fee changes that to a different metric, which is in any given year, that the person who's using the system in that year and over the rest of the life of however long they're going to be using it should be equal for everybody. And so that's why the average annual cost tries to become equal for everybody. And it is into that alternative metric. And then in year 35, the average annual cost for everybody is zero. There's no more to be collected. So even if you did say in 60 years, the cost of it is actually zero. So in that case, all those years from 35 to 60, everybody has the same cost as well. It just happens to be zero because you already paid it off. So it's kind of back to my original comment, which is I think it's important for the board to grapple with how do you want to measure equity? Because that's what you're trying to solve for inequity. How do you want to solve for the equity?
Your point is that it's not zero after year 35, that we
Well,
that we, the current owners, have prepaid
Yeah,
our portion, so
yeah.
there's still,
Right, there's no more cash going
Right.
out because it's to pay debt, because the debt's been paid. But, and so Alan is right about that. It's just that it's been prepaid for years of benefit that will go beyond the payment term.
you won't get paid back by the later arrivals.
Correct. In a way that's equitable to them.
So I think what I hear is consensus that we think there is a problem, there is an inequity. That's important. Therefore, I would say that, by inference, if there is a problem, we should say that we intend to solve it. We don't necessarily know the mechanism by which we're going to solve it because it's really complicated. But I think those first two things are pretty important in my mind. We've got a problem. We've got to say we're going to resolve to figure out a way to fix it. Okay?
So Standish, from my point of view, I'm glad the board is looking at this and considering this. But what's not clear to me is now the consensus that you think that the timeline that you'll get to some decision is so that it can be implemented by July 1? Because I'd hate to see us here a year from now still talking about this.
My sense is we could figure it out and implement it before July 1.
Okay.
And I think that's what your sense was.
That's the
was.
intention, yeah.
But I don't think it's easy, so I think it's going to take a couple months.
Yeah, one thing that really bends my head when I look at this is not just the fact that we may not be fully built out by the end of the time frame, but that we've assumed that it's going to happen linearly. And that's we're going to calculate numbers based on the fact that it's going to be a linear progression towards full build out. And that, is almost categorically not true. So it could distort the outcomes quite a lot, and that just really perplexes me.
Unless there's anything else, should we move on?
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Alan.
Good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're back to 8C2, which is Russ Powerhouse depreciation. And I think that includes Brandy, is that right? It does. Be right back.
So as the board is aware, we employed Exponential Engineering to do a depreciation study on the powerhouse to hopefully extend the period of depreciation for the powerhouse now that it's gone into standby mode. And through working with Howard Barnes, our Russ consultant, and Bob Benson, who is our Russ accountant consultant, we have gotten movement through RUS, and they have taken it to a committee. So that's excellent news. They're actually reacting to it. They have come back, the committee has come back with a series of questions, and I'm pleased to introduce Howard Barnes and Brandy Fitchner that's going to go over those questions and where we currently stand. So we'll start off with Howard.
Thanks, Michael. I was contacted about a week ago by the committee during their committee meeting, at which time they were reviewing the depreciation study that had been prepared by an Exponential, working with Bob Benson. They generated a series of questions. I took them down verbally and wrote them and provided them to the district. And these are the 6 questions. In effect, what they're trying to determine is it appropriate to change the depreciation rate on the powerhouse from the current 7% rate to the requested rate of either 2.26 or 2.0% requested. There is limited information about the actual, how the powerhouse will be used once the Out Valley project is in service. And that's one of the gaps I think that you'll see. I'm going to let Brandy address the specific questions or how she's intending to answer them. But the plan is for Michael to generate a letter that will respond to these questions, and as well as giving additional background information on why the importance of changing the depreciation rate, and as well as special issues that are unique about Kirkwood as to why this is appropriate. Randy, why don't you address each of these points if you could?
Sure. So on the first question, they ask about maintenance and replacements that would be used at the powerhouse. for testing and emergency use. And basically, we will provide the committee with the Caterpillar and the Volvo standby maintenance interval schedules. We were given both of those as part of our operating procedures for the powerhouse, and we plan to follow those by the letter. As far as the number of hours of use for testing at the powerhouse, what we are doing is we are doing a generator run offline for 15 minutes a week, and then we plan to do online for an hour a month, so that totals 25 hours a year per generator. And similarly, the number of hours that might be anticipated for emergency operation, we are anticipating no more than a 1% downtime based on industry standards. So when I took that 1% and I based it on the current generator hours that we have over our lifespan so far, we came up with 31 hours of emergency use per year.
Per engine.
Per engine, correct. Moving on to question 4, the contractual arrangements for maintenance and replacement. What we have here is rather than a contractual arrangement, we have a long-term relationship with Holt of California. District staff performs all of our basic and minor service needs, filter changes, inspections, and periodic running of the generators. Our major maintenance will be performed by Holt of California based on the hours required at each service. On question number 5, warranty information, and then also what information can be provided with regard to anticipated useful life. As you know, the district purchased extensions on the manufacturer's warranties to ensure that all the generators remained under warranty during our prime operation. Those agreements have been included, will be included with these packets, but based on engine hours, we have 2 Volvos remaining under warranty. We have received from both Holt of California on the CATs and Power Secure on the Volvos that we'll need to do an overhaul every 10 to 15,000 hours on these generators. And based on the current engine hours, which average about 6,000 hours per generator, we're looking at about another 69 to 158 years before we need an overhaul. The first
That's the
overhaul.
first one.
So we've got those calculations. And those calculations are included. Holt of California went even further and said that they feel confident that a total life of approximately 100,000 hours can be expected on the Caterpillars. And then the last question here is correlation between hours of use in emergency mode versus prime mode. And what we found out is that the Holt of California in particular was very clear that their expected useful life is not based on the number of years that those generators sit there. It is based on the number of hours they run, regardless of if they are in standby or in prime. So that is the information that we are planning to pass on to the committee.
Great. Any questions, input from the board or public? Howard?
There's a few more slides. 2 more
Oh,
slides.
okay, sorry.
Sorry. From my perspective, the depreciation study could have provided additional information with regard to how the units will be used once they're in a standby mode. So you could see there was definitely a theme there about really not sufficient information to be able to make a determination. When they talked to me, they were leaning during the meeting to using a depreciation rate somewhere between 25 and 35 years. And that's ludicrous in a standby mode. But there's not sufficient information to do something different at this point in time. Bob Benson, as the RUS accountant, field accountant, and finance and person that's recommending accounting, he's recommending that we go at this point, let them make a determination, and then possibly appeal that decision. if you look at the current 7% depreciation rate prescribed by RUS, and you look at the depreciation that's been used on both the CAD and the Volvos, they're fairly much in line when you're using the units in a prime mode, i.e. the powerhouse is still used as the normal source of power. In fact, I did the calculations, and it's very close to a 7% rate. From my perspective, I think the most appropriate rate that we should appeal to RUS on is something called an hours of use method. From an accounting perspective, RUS recognizes an hour of use, but only for certain types of specialized equipment, like general plant in the way of trucks, specialized vehicles as such. They've not done it, to my knowledge, on generation. But I think if there's ever been a case where this is appropriate, then I think hours of use, we can't give up on this idea. And even Bob Benson will tell you that, yeah, he can see the logic of why this would be used in your case. So what I think is going to happen is the committee, with the information that Michael's going to send them, next week we'll make what I call the first determination. And that first determination probably is not going to be what we're hoping for. But I'm hoping that the letter of transmittal at least opens the idea to RUS that there's a lot of other possible approaches that, even though they weren't in the depreciation study, they should have been in there, and that includes the hours of use of concept, so that we're opening the door to a redetermination. And I believe what would happen would be RUS would say, based on the initial finding, they would say somewhere between 3-4% possibly. You would be able to reduce from 7 to 3 to 4, go in then with appealing based on all relevant information, and then shoot for a lower, and hours of use would even be below 2%. It really would. So, and I don't think anybody in RUS could really say that it's not appropriate for this ultimately. Fortunately, in the depreciation committee, you have accountants, you have engineers, you have people, so it's not just accounting people making the determination.
So do you think we're better off tactically getting that middle ground or reappealing it, or should we play for more time to get more facts on the
If
table?
we had done, all things being perfect on that Standish, I think we should have made our best case from the get-go. But there's water under, we can't change what's already in there in the depreciation. I think we're going to have to appeal the decision.
But would we be able to reduce our rates accordingly, even with, like, say, 3.5%?
Yeah, the
We
3
would
to
still be able
4
to take
could be
advantage of that.
implemented based on what they're finding, but then you would be able to go in and appeal that based on logic of and hours of use with further information that was not in the original study.
Any other questions or comments from the board? So I hand over here. From Nancy?
We're all certain this, but why wasn't it in the original study? It's been mentioned
I would say
several
that the strategy that we had, the recommendations that we received from Bob Benson were different from what the recommendation we're getting from Howard. And it was just a different, Bob Benson was worried that the accountants on the RUS committee wouldn't take to the time measurement and strictly went with the units of measure. So it's just a different strategy. We went with one, and even if we get a 25 to 35, it's a huge rate, and if we can reduce that by another percentage, that's even better. So I think it's a win-win that we're talking about here.
Nancy?
So, assuming Russ comes back and says, the committee comes back and says, yes, reduce it to the 3%, is that going forward, or can we go back?
Not being an accountant, but an engineer, my general understanding is that that goes back retroactive to when the powerhouse is in effect, in use, or when the Valley grid is connection, not back to day one, because it is appropriate to the rate of depreciation during the period of time that the Out Valley was not available. So it would be retroactive, I believe, to November 1st.
Okay. And then the second question I have is, from an appeal process or the next step after that, are there time limits that have to be adhered to, or can it be just?
It's up to you, number one, how quickly that can be generated. It took the committee took a little while in actually starting to meet on this. They've had the material since when? When did it go in?
October.
October.
It was October till December till they met on this. So it's such a big issue for you that it's one of the most consequential. In addition to the answers to the questions, I've prepared what I consider a list of unique issues that are far and again unique to Kirkwood that need to be recognized by RUS. And this is something that perhaps I have not mentioned to you before, but do you know that right now you have the highest retail rates of any RUS system in the United States?
We could have guessed on that.
Right. And if they go to 7%, a depreciation rate of continuing at 7%, along with the Out Valley project, you'd be at a rate that would be even further above that. The key is developing these lists of unique issues related to Kirkwood and trying to have RUS recognize that you don't want to get into a situation of price elasticity where customers' use starts to become having a bearing on the use, and then you spiral downward. That would be the worst possible thing. Number two, it's not appropriate for today's customers to be paying for an asset that's going to have a value well beyond what the depreciation period is. And that is a fundamental reason that the agency, I believe, ultimately will reach the right conclusion here. It's just that we're going to have to bend the window, or bend the, whatever his expression is, open the door to the idea that this hours of use can be used for something other than just general plant, i.e. specialized plant, and should be, in your case, available for generation as well. Among other attachments, there will be a graph which I prepared showing the retail rates for all RUS systems, showing you are the highest at the current time, and a graph showing what the relative impact of the different depreciation rates is such. So just stay tuned. I think we're going to get ultimately a right decision here. It's just going to take some time.
Well, as usual, Howard, that's super helpful, and we wish you would show up more.
You can call me up or look for me.
Do we have those graphs in
No.
our packets? We don't.
They're not, they're not
But,
today.
Michael, we have Randy's slide. I don't think we have the other PowerPoint slides. Could you email those around?
Do you want to share with the board everything that you're going to be sending in either today or over the weekend?
Yeah, just give it to me first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else on that, Michael?
No, I think there's information.
That's really wonderful work, and we appreciate your help. Thank you, Brandy. So we're moving on to 8D, which is discussion and possible action related to the district's operations and maintenance of the Out Valley line. Manager Sharp, starting with an overall update.
So did I mention that we have a tabletop after? So we're having regular meetings as far as our O&M. O&M on the Out Valley line is the true unknown going into this project. We just didn't know how much time it would take. We got a call from Caltrans saying, everything looks great, where's your stakes on your vaults? And we said, what stakes on the vaults? And so I met with Caltrans, and we went out into the field, and we actually identified areas that he felt that Caltrans felt that were, could be impacted by their plows. And when you give a vault and a plow together, the plow wins. So we went out and we staked all of our vaults between here and Silver Lake, and you'll actually see them out there on the road. If you're looking for them, they'll be on your the west side of the road, and they've got red on them, signifying electrical lines. So there's more. And this all goes along with Dick Shanahan's point of being extra, going above and beyond for overhead maintenance and during our inspection, if standard policy is inspected once a month, well, we're going to inspect it twice a month. And so far, it's helped us out. Not only have we installed additional stakes and done tabletop exercises, but we are inspecting. We've completed November's inspection. After this storm, we intend to do December's inspection. And we've done all of the forms, and one of the forms, we've actually added a elevation view so that when you go out there, I mean, it basically, besides Dave Riley, everything looks kind of the same. It just looks like big, electrical, and dangerous. So now we identify what this big, electrical, and dangerous actually is, so that when they're on the form, they can be writing down the right numbers, and they realize what they're looking at, and getting them more and more familiarity with that equipment. So very pleased with our, during this outage yesterday, we had administrative staff on standby, we have powerhouse staff on standby, and what they're doing on standby while we're out in the field chopping down trees is that they're calling the next step. They're always thinking about what's next. So we had calls into Jason with Wilson Construction, who actually came up and met us on the Spur 19 as we were leaving, because we couldn't contact him, but he was already on his way up. We had calls into an arborist, because we didn't know whether it would be a tree that we could actually handle in-house. It very nearly was a tree that we couldn't handle in-house, and Jill had already contacted 2 arborists, one that was on his way from Pioneer, one was ready to go from Gardnerville. So we're starting to make those contacts, and it's so vital for us to know what is the problem. Is it the underground? That's Titan Electric. Is it the overhead? That's Wilson Construction. Do we have the repair couplings that we need? Is it a conduit section, or is it a direct bury section? Do we have a patch kit? All this is going into our operations and maintenance of the system. So I'm pleased with how much progress we've made. We've learned a lot, and I'll touch on a little bit what we've learned about transportation in the next in 2 more agenda titles. But I think it's gone well, and I open up to any questions from the board.
You know, I think everyone else is too. I'm just impressed with everything you guys are doing, really. And what you did yesterday is a perfect indication of that.
I think it'll take you 2 years to get your cadence, you just experience and all the spare parts, everything down pat. Any questions, comments, input from the audience? Thanks for the update. That's great.
2 areas that are extremely important. When I look at the board, I need to say to the board and to the community that if we have a power outage, the powerhouse will automatically turn back on. All the generators will fire, and we'll have instantaneous power within 4 minutes, 5 minutes. I need to be able to say that to Vail as well. And I also need to be able to say that during lift operations, I don't have to have a person at the powerhouse to ensure that we could turn back on the power within a certain amount of time. Currently, we don't have that ability. As I mentioned at the previous board meeting, if the power goes out right now, we have to manually turn over our generators, turn them on, warm them up, and make the switch over. It's pretty quick. I think we were at 10 or 11 minutes yesterday. That's pretty good. And we actually had a little bit of a problem. So I think we can get that number down, but the importance of having what we call load-dependent start-stop, or powerhouse coming up, is vitally important. Secondarily, we need the ability to test our generators with load. Right now, we have the ability to turn them on, watch them run, but not with load. We need the ability to have them actually doing something. And the reason that that's so important, not only is it important to have a piece of machinery actually operate under load to test it, but our emissions build up. We have a DPF filters where actually the heat from a machine under load actually burns off our emissions. And if you don't burn those up, they get clogged up. They're called DPF filters, and that's part of our emissions. And if we continuously run those without load, they'll clog up, and you actually have to take them out and send them to Reno, and they put them into an oven, and they burn them off. We've received a proposal from Exponential Engineering to complete both of these projects. It's reprogramming of PLCs at the district for a bid amount of not to exceed $19,450, I think it is. This will allow Exponential Engineering to come out here, work with the people that originally programmed this equipment, and reprogram it so we have the ability to A, turn on the powerhouse immediately in the event of a power failure, and B, be able to test the generators on a monthly basis, as Brandy mentioned earlier, for an hour each under load. And it would be to load the valve. We would be able to, and we can't overdo this because we can't send power down the line. That's against our interconnection. So it has to be synchronized so that we only provide the power that the valley needs, no more than that. So it is a programming issue. And Dave Wrightley's here to expand upon my introduction, if so needed.
Essentially, PowerSecure put enough equipment in the powerhouse 3 years ago, 2 years ago when they finished it, to allow for some of the things that Michael's talking about. At that time, the IA wasn't finished. Exactly what PG&E's requirements weren't known. The out valley wasn't designed, it wasn't completely designed. We didn't really know whether we'd have 2 lines coming into the switchgear or 1. Our proposal is to use this equipment that's there that can start the powerhouse automatically on the event of an outage and get the customers back online, and can transition between generator and out valley in meeting the requirements of PG&E. And I said that's what we've got in our proposal, is essentially to reprogram some of these generator controllers to make sure that the steps the generators go through will synchronize with the out valley. Let's say we're going from out valley to generator, we synchronize, we very briefly parallel our generators in out valley, very briefly. It's all automatic, this is not a manual thing, and then quickly break that parallel. In this act, your customers aren't going to know there was an outage. They're not going to see a flicker of light or anything like that. And I think it's very doable. Like I said, the equipment's there to make it happen, and I'm convinced that as these transitions occur, it's not going to be an impact on the customers. That's how your equipment is designed. We're tweaking the controls to meet what we have today without valley with PG&E's requirements.
Any questions, comments from the board? From the audience?
So Standish, if the board goes ahead and approves this, then that is just like an add-on to the Valley project?
Is it an additional project, or is it a change order? We'll be paying
no,
for
it would be.
right?
I think this is not, the Out Valley project is done. I think this is a new project.
This was not part of Exponential's scope at all in looking at the out valley design.
No, but I've been encouraged by the whole board and staff to stress that we literally needed this yesterday. So I'm enthusiastic about approving it, and we'll just soon have you stay here as much as possible that coming week to get it done.
Hopefully we can be doing some testing as early as next week.
Okay.
And I'm confident in Brandy and her staff. They've been working with us not just on the synchronization issue, but even other issues related to the out valley. Brandy updated relay settings for us a couple weeks ago after that outage on November 6th. Kelly's done some programming for us.
Really?
With our direction, and we're being careful.
Michael, is there anything else you had to say? Do you have a recommendation? I think you made it.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask one other question. So Michael, in a lot of ways, it was fortunate that it happened during the day. But what would have happened if it had been at night?
We have an on-call system where we have people, we automatically would get over there and turn it on, but it would be longer.
Okay.
It definitely would be longer. At this point, it would be longer. We
Right.
have staffed it during lift operations because there's a safety factor of having people hanging from chairs, waiting for us. So.
Okay, thank you.
So this was on the agenda in the November board package. Did we discuss it and we just didn't approve the proposal? We discussed it saying that there was a proposal forthcoming?
Forthcoming, we've deferred on this, I think 2 different times because the proposal wasn't ready at that point.
Well, I'd like to move that we approve this proposal by Exponential Engineering for for a not to exceed figure $19,560.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you. 8D3 is discussion and possible action regarding the purchase of a snowmobile in the amount of $8,189 for out valley inspections and maintenance. Manager Sharp.
So, during my presentation with regards to the outage that we suffered yesterday, I kept mentioning the fortunate location of that tree being next to a road. Right now, I don't know if we could have done the work that we did. In fact, I know we probably couldn't get our vehicle up there and do the work we did because of the snow conditions out there. When you start getting working out there, you do realize that KM Green's right in the smack dab in nowhere. And there aren't good roads that go there. And Director Dornberg and I have talked quite a bit for probably almost a year now on what sort of transportation the KM Green and the Out Valley project would need. And though Operations Capital didn't have a meeting, I have talked to Director Dornberg about this, and I'm convinced that we should start small with a snowmobile to get equipment and personnel out to the site so that we can see what's going on. There are instances that we need to be out at KM Green, and we cannot walk there in an efficient time. We need it. The nice thing about it, and I don't know if you can see this on your graph, but right there in the, let's see if this will actually work. Right there, KM Green is sitting right there, and all these blue dots.
Right where, I'm sorry?
KM Green is right here. And all this blue area that you're seeing, those are maintained snowmobile trails by the United States Forest Service. So we are sitting literally right next to a snowmobile trail that once they get 18 inches of snow down at Salt Springs, they start grooming as part of their recreation aspects. So we have a road from Bear Valley Bear Valley Resort to the KM Green maintained through by the U.S. Forest Service on snowmobile tracks. I recommend that the board consider the purchase of a, wrong way.
It's an Arctic Cat.
An Arctic Cat
2000.
Arctic Cat Bearcat 2000, as shown in this picture. The cost is in $9,737 with all the shipping, freight, commissioning, etc. The nice thing about these is that Dave Waddle found this. This had been an order from a ski resort, and actually who declined it. They decided they didn't want this. This is in stock in South Lake Tahoe. At this time of year, as you can figure, it's hard to get snowmobiles specifically of this nature. This is a utility snowmobile. It's a little bit lighter, but it will carry 2 people and equipment, and it can carry a trailer in the future if we wanted to actually tow equipment along with it. I know it's $9,700. We don't have a lot of money. We can finance this through our letter of credit through Bank of the West at 4.25% interest if we so desired. The district staff has looked at this and feels that it's especially with the snow, that it's a needed tool for us to continue to maintain the Out Valley project.
Would we put it on a trailer and leave it down at Bear River Reservoir?
Right now, we put it in a truck when we would look at a trailer. Ultimately, we'd like to get a trailer because it just makes more sense.
Okay, we put it on a truck and bring it back here.
Right. Well, it's not only for getting to KM Green. I mean, that's ultimately,
right.
But it's also for reviewing there's many miles of underground that we need to get to, and many of the underground lines is also on snowmobile tracks, so we could, go to our sectionalizing cabinets easily and quickly. But there's different endpoints because so you need to be able to unload it and load it efficiently.
Should we be looking at a trailer for that thing? Because if we have to go in there, I don't know.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
we're going to
wanna
research
have
it.
an emergency and not have the ability to get equipment in there if we go out and spend this amount of money on a snowmobile.
Yeah, our
I'm
next,
just asking the question, actually.
yeah, our next project would be to research a trailer for this equipment.
It's a lot easier to load quickly if you have a trailer. It's slower to the ground rather than trying to get it up into the back of a truck.
Right.
So in an emergency, it's quicker. I think it would justify the cost of a trailer, pay for itself.
I was referring to a trailer that goes in the back of that to bring equipment in. which
Oh.
are-
Yeah, and it's,
Both good
they are
issues.
available.
Oh, yeah, you can, yeah, or we could fabricate them, I've made before.
Okay.
We've got.
Full service board of directors.
Take some old broken metal skis. They're pretty easy to make.
Is this something that's worthwhile looking at
Metal
Vail
skis.
Resorts buying power to perhaps help us with this purchase?
I don't, we looked into the type of
But I mean,
snowmobiles that
skis
they
like
actually
those.
have and contacted a rep, and they just can't get that model as quickly as we can get this one, so. And this is at we looked at the same kind that they have there, and they're at over $12,000. Because this is on stock and it's kind of we're getting a discount on the rate as well for it. So we feel this is a good deal, and we're getting a discount from the distributor vendor.
And you think it's the right piece of equipment?
Yes, we do.
Nancy?
So Michael, I know that Vail, as well as Vail's predecessor, had a training program. You had to pass a certification to be able to jump on a snowmobile from year to year. So I'm just wondering what kind of training will staff be given to be able to operate that?
Good question. So we have several people on staff that are experienced snowmobile. We're very fortunate to hire someone that actually lives at the Bear River Resort and actually has snowmobiles. So, and we also have Greg Wallace, who's works on snowmobiles as well. So I think we have some expertise on staff, but we would have a training and I don't know about a certification program. I'm not familiar with that, but there would have to be a training program.
I guess I would just encourage it and maybe ask Casey about that, because they're so safety conscious that they do it on an annual basis. And so even somebody like Dave Myers, who's been with the resort forever, I mean, he has to go through that.
Great.
Being the former risk manager for the resort, I used to implement that program and perform that, as well as going through the training with Alpine County Search and Rescue. So I'm really familiar with it, and we would definitely implement this similar program with our operators.
Okay, great.
Any other
I just said, I know $9,000 is $9,000, but it is well within the range that we've talked about in the committee as we've looked at different pieces of equipment
It's a good
during
deal.
committee meetings. So, I mean, I was expecting ultimately maybe something closer to $20,000, so this is actually a nice surprise.
And do you have a recommendation, which I assume is to get this, but to finance it or pay cash for it?
At this point, I think we should pay cash for it.
Okay, I'm prepared to move that we purchase the Bearcat 2000 XT as recommended by Michael.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. So 8E is discussion and possible action related. Michelle, I can relate to you. As this project is going on, I'm having more and more trouble reading these agendas, especially after they're scanned and printed out with full printers. So discussion of possible action relating to PG&E system impact study regarding the district's efforts to comply with PG&E's transmission interconnection handbook related to the interconnection agreement. Manager Sharp.
So last week we had a meeting with PG&E to discuss our proposal with complying with the transmission interconnection handbook. And basically, Michelle and I went down to West Sacramento, and everybody from PG&E showed up. So it was, I think there was 14 folks down there. And we, what the intent was is, as per our schedule, we had to make a proposal on what they should be studying in their system impact study. We didn't want to go down there and say, well, what do you think? We don't want the system impact study having a shotgun approach, because with PG&E, more than 14 people would start analyzing this and trying to figure out what approach. So we wanted to go in there with the 22 approach and say, this is exactly what we think you should study. And what we came up with between Dave Riley and Michelle Gamble and I is that we should study a single breaker solution. A single breaker solution, and remember that the Transmission Interconnection Handbook wants that our point of demarcation, that our protection for our line is within a span of 100 feet, 200 feet of that point of demarcation. So it would be very close by. Right now, it's sitting up on KM Green. So we were looking for a solution that was extremely close to our point of demarcation. So we came up with this idea of installing a switch station in between poles 2 and 3 at the substation at the Salt Springs instead of 1 and 2, because the distance between 1 and 2 is too close to actually get the lines coming down into the substation without prohibiting vehicular traffic underneath that might be carrying things. And PG&E was not buying it. Their hydro division didn't like it. It was in the middle of their road. So what we were looking for was a solution that they could buy into quickly and that did not involve a lot of their time and energy and construction. We didn't want them getting into a massive project that they would have to construct, own, charge us O&M for, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking for a solution that we thought that they could buy into. And that solution is a switch station at Salt Springs between 2 and 3 with the point of demarcation to continue to be at pole number 1.
So can you, is it easier for you to pull up the board packet where you show that? Which is
Yeah.
page 83.
I'm actually having a little difficulty. I put so many slides on here that my computer is extremely slow. Hold on one second.
Or if that's hard, I can retract the suggestion.
No, that's okay. I'll be right there.
There you go. Perfect. So where would the switch station go?
So right now, I hope you can see my little
No, I think you
point.
have to point to it. Go ahead. Point to it.
You
I
have to
will.
stand up.
Oh, would it be better? Okay. So here is the map of the area right now. And this is the 115 line. This goes to Tiger Creek. This is Salt Springs. That is pole number 1 right there. And our current point of demarcation is right there. If you look in your packet, which I believe I gave you a picture between 1 and 2, it's a very short area. There's a road that goes right here. This is a steep bank that you can't tell right here. This is also a bank that goes up here. It's a former quarry. To put in our switch station here, it might fit, what it does is it limits the headroom that comes through. Hydro hated it because of the future expansion, the dams right here, that they might have in this area. A much preferred location is where we have a lot of headroom. This is up against a wall here, which you can see in a picture that I distributed. And in this location here, it has a lot more flexibility on where we put it. We're looking at a substation about 70 by 70. It would have 2 structures for the lines to come in, and then it would be break down into switches on either side of the breaker. It has a lot of benefits. One of the things is that the protection relay system that we have, and let me get to a slide that will show that. This is an excellent picture showing that slide. That is pole number 1. That's pole number 2. You can see the distance between them is very short. However, the distance between 2 and 3 is quite long, and you can see that this is already a disturbed area. This is so right in this area here, could be an excellent place for this new tap location. I think that's a good picture depicting that. This next, that shows you how narrow the area between 1 and 2 is.
With a road.
And with a road in it. That shows you, once again, the area between 2 and 3. Now here is an important, this is our existing protection scheme. This is Tiger Creek, this is Salt Springs, this is KM Green. And you can see that this entire area is in this protection scheme. And our protection, our demarcation point is here, our protection is up here. Hence, we don't conform to the TIH. What the team has come up with is actually to actually shorten or diminish the location of that tree by bringing the breaker down here. That protection scheme is we're very close to the point of demarcation being between 2 and 3. One of our negotiating points is that we do need to continue to have the point of demarcation at pole number 1. It's an important factor. We also don't want to move the metering equipment here down to the new switch station, be extremely expensive and cost more than we would want to. What we would be proposing is that it's industry standard that there is a maintenance fee that you can charge or pay. A line loss fee is actually what it is, because there's line loss in between KM Green and so there would be, we would have to have a calculation, because we don't want to move the meter, and there's a certain amount of line loss that you would experience between the two, so there's a calculation that we would make there. And then finally, what this does is it leaves the three-way protection there. It leaves Salt Springs and Tiger Creek alone. They don't have to tear it up. PG&E has to do no construction at Salt Springs or Tiger Creek, except maybe changing some relays in order to make this solution work. So I think it solves the issue of the TIH. It keeps PG&E's construction costs out of it. It's simplistic and it's affordable in that a larger switch station would be much more capital extensive, and I think this one is much more doable. So we made this pitch down in Sacramento, and PG&E bought into it. Their protection people felt that they brought up some valid points, but they bought into it. They liked the idea of keeping the three-way protection scheme there because they already had this mechanism already in place. So I think getting them to buy into it was huge. What we're doing now is we're defining that on a piece of paper, sending it back down to them for their input, and then once they give that input, with that input, we'll send it back down to official request to start the system impact study.
So I have two questions, let's start with two. One is the way the wire would run is it would keep the existing demarcation point at pole 1, go to pole 2, instead of going from pole 2 to 3 to go down to the switch station, across and back up to pole 3?
Yes.
Okay. And secondly, if we keep the three-way protection system, that means we keep the upgraded switching gear at Salt Springs, Tiger Creek, and KM Green, so we don't get out of O&M on that or ITCC on that.
Well, I think the argument back is during this phase of the truing up is that in the past we thought that the entire cost is ours either way, but is the O&M on the protection scheme between Tiger Creek and Salt Springs, can we reduce that, saying that they already have and have to have protection between the two? Maybe it's only a third, maybe it's even less because it's only 200 feet of protection that we're looking at. So that's the argument that I'm going to be making with Bob Daniels.
Michael, could I comment too?
Please.
the equipment that's at Green now, that the district is responsible for the O&M and ITCC with PG&E, essentially this scheme here just takes that identical equipment and moves it down to this new station. And clearly that amount of, that equipment is going to stay as an O&M and ITCC issue. It is dedicated to the district's tab. So I think Michael made a good point about the equipment that they've got between Tiger and Salt. That's debatable, how much of that really is attributable. So by using this single breaker scheme, we're taking the costs that we have, we're about $100,000 worth of equipment. We're still working on exactly figuring out what the number is, and some relays and stuff. But essentially, the same equipment will be at the tab. We can look at that as kind of a cost neutral.
My memory, when all this was discussed a couple months ago, was, we should have in our mind something like $2 million for this. But that was worth it because of all the reduction in costs in the ITC and the O&M and so on, that we were actually a pretty quick payback on that. With this single switch scheme and the location, what should we have in mind, just as a ballpark number to carry around in our heads? $2 million still, or something less?
I'd leave the $2 million, but it's a much firmer $2 million, if not less.
Ooh, that's politically correct.
Oh, in other words, I should have had $3 million.
It
really is $2 million.
No, I think it's a much, and I think Dave might be able to address this, but just from my perspective and being in the meetings, this is a, capital-wise, this is a much less expensive solution than other solutions that we've looked at. Dual breaker systems and all that, much more expensive, much larger footprint. A single breaker, 70 by 70, much smaller area. Dave, you want to address the capital cost?
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with your $2 million assessment as being much firmer, because we know with this plan, the involvement for PG&E in review and even construction, we just lived through this. As far as what they did at Green, the same thing would happen down here. So there's a big risk when we look at PG&E's construction costs. We've seen what's happened with their costs. And, I think what we're doing here is minimizing what they have to do. We have a clear picture of what they will need to do. Therefore, I think that gives us a good idea of what those costs are going to be. I think $2 million is a good number to look at as a conservative approach.
Well, let me follow up on that and my prior question, and I'll stop. But do you think it's worthwhile, Dave or Michael, to consider a bigger solution than a single breaker, maybe a two-breaker solution, if we could get rid of the switchgear that we just installed in Tiger Creek and Salt Springs and not have to pay O&M on that? Or do you
Not
think
at
that's
all. And the reason being is I'm terrified of PG&E's construction costs. And in a two-breaker or a three-breaker solution, they would own two of those breakers, and they would construct two of those breakers. And
So it's, in that case, it's just replicating what we just did at Salt Spring and Tiger Creek locally.
right, and it's not a relay issue. It's breakers, and they would have to own, and they would probably want to construct those. They might want to construct the entire switch station, and you double the size of the switch station. So, to answer your question, I think this is is the best of both worlds. We solve for PG&E's issues as far as the distance between the demarcation and the breaker, and we keep them out of the construction business.
Right. All right, so we're just going to be, we need to recognize we're living with OTC and O&M, except for what we can negotiate as incremental on the Salt Springs, Tiger Creek stuff.
Yes, sir.
So they were specifically okay with not having pole 2 be deeded over to them?
No, that's part of the system impact study. That's going to be part of our, I would say that at the meeting, they're in agreement that this is a good approach, but the system impact study is where they come back and say, here's the project.
So they could ask for pole 2?
They could ask for it, which is about $311,000 times 4.56% forever.
Okay. Any other questions?
Plus tax.
that's half or 40% of pole one for whatever reason. Cheap pole.
Pole one's big. Pole one's really big.
Questions, comments, input from the audience or from the board? So this is just an update item, Michael, is that right? You're not looking for any action?
No, just letting the board know of our direction, I think is important, and that we will be submitting this back to PG&E for their comment, and then requesting that they start the system impact study. And we'll be coming back before the board with those costs as far as how much the system impact study. Typically, that's about $70,000.
Do we know any more about what the construction season would be in that location?
We haven't seen any peregrine falcons. So.
Are we supposed to see one or not? I mean, because I know the owls, you want to see them.
We don't want to see
You don't
one
want to see
nest.
them.
Well, I think Michael and I discussed that earlier this week, and he sort of said 3 years, and I kind of said 2 years, meaning 1 year for designing, permitting it, and 1 year to
But the
construct.
construction costs, if you have a 60-day and then close it out, it's going to be worse than having,
Right.
6 months.
Right. If we got lucky, I think we could build it in 1 season.
With 1 year to permit, 1 year to, that would be best case, 3 years, I think is.
Yeah, right.
Is the equivalent of a firm or $2 million. Well, actually, I certainly support the direction you're moving in, which is simplicity with PG&E. I think that's great.
Yeah, I think it was a really good meeting. Michelle, do you have any further comments on that, or?
No, it was really great, I think, for the team to be in there with PG&E and hear their concurrence with the approach that we wanted to have for this project, and getting that right up front was huge.
Cool. So we have now discussion of possible approval of proposal from Kirkwood Resort Development to modify the calculation of the maintenance guarantee of the Timber Creek Townhomes project and a general update.
Could, this meeting's gone on for 2.5 hours. Could we have a 5-minute recess?
I don't know. It's the consensus of the board.
Run for the doors.
This is
starts at 6, provided we're done. Here.
Standish,
You're not laughing.
You were not supposed to learn from me. You were supposed to do it your own way.
So Michael, 8F.
So Timber Creek Townhomes is under construction. I think everybody can look up the hill and see that 2 units are put together. And they're not, they don't look like mobile homes and flatbeds anymore. They're actually put together, and from what I've heard, they've been getting favorable results. The district has many different items that we need to do to finish the closeout. We need to receive the as-built drawings. We need to make sure that our final punch lists are done. We need to make sure that they provide the adequate information to complete the development. One of the aspects of the development agreement is that the developer posts a maintenance guarantee. This maintenance guarantee is for 50% of the cost of the improvements that they will be deeding over to the district once it becomes final map and we complete it and give them a notice of acceptance. The infrastructure that we're talking about is $222,000, and that's of water lines, sewer lines, electrical components, etc. And we're looking for a instrument, 50% of that amount, in an instrument that is acceptable to the district. It should be noted that only 2 of the units are coming online, and the infrastructure is actually there for 11 different units. So a proposal has been put forth so that instead of coming up, the developer is having difficulty coming up with $111,000 of a liquid form of deposit. They've offered us a deed of trust, but if we have an issue and and we need to get something repaired, it's very difficult to get cash out of the deed of trust. So what we've come up with is the concept of only requiring a maintenance guarantee for the units that are coming online, which would actually be 2. So 2 11ths of the $111,000 or $20-some thousand. This would give us a liquid form of cash, and it would also extend the period of the maintenance guarantee. This is a 1-year maintenance guarantee. This would extend the period of time through time, because as the other units come online, of course, we would require that portion of that maintenance guarantee be paid, and that clock would start ticking at that point. So if they brought on 4 units next time, we'd ask them for 4 11ths, and et cetera, and that maintenance guarantee. The nice thing about for the district is it's a liquid form of cash. It extends the period of time that we actually have a maintenance guarantee, and it extends the period of time when that maintenance guarantee is in effect for when the units are in service, which is much more important than having a maintenance guarantee on a valve that's closed. We want that valve to be working. We want the operation to happen. We want those transformers to be running and the propane to have service so that we can see if there's a problem. If you collect the maintenance guarantee up against the stuck valve, all you have is, well, you know that valve holds pressure, you don't know how the system works. So it actually makes more sense for the district to collect maintenance guarantees when units go into effect rather than just when infrastructure is deeded over. So with that, I recommend that the board approve the maintenance guarantee amount for, I think it's approximately 2 11ths of the $111,000, or approximately $20,000 for the first 2 units of this as the condition for the developer agreement. This has been passed through the planning committee.
Planning committee likes it. We recommend adopting this. This was Michael's idea. It's a very creative idea compared to the other alternative, which is always been to have a bond put up, and bond doesn't do anything particularly beneficial for us compared to Michael's proposal. So we recommend adoption. I'd also like to point out that we closed this negotiation with Nate Whaley in 15 minutes, which is a new record compared to the previous record
Michael, two questions. When the 2 units get sold, we refund the $20,000 to the developer a year after we take it. Is that the way it works?
Yeah, so when the district, mid-January, when the project actually goes to final acceptance and it gets final map, they give us a check for the $20,000, and then 1 year later, that starts for those 2 units. When they close on other units, they would have to pay an additional maintenance guarantee.
Okay, so we've got that ability to collect the extra 40 if they put on, 4 units next year, say.
Right.
Okay. And then my second question was, what's a unit? Is it a building with a couple of separate units inside of it, or is it 2 units in one building?
2 units in one building.
Okay, so they built one building.
Yes, they did.
Okay. Sorry, Alan?
So mechanically, if they take 5 years to sell a project out, in the 5th year, there are 2 units left, we take a $20,000 deposit on that, and it goes for 12 months. So if in the final year, we have a $30,000 problem, is that our $10,000 to eat, or do we get to go back to them?
In the final year, if you had,
And the
well, we'd
12-month
already,
the 12-month guarantee for the last 2 units, assuming it was 2 units that's closed up the project, we'd have a $20,000 deposit. If we took a $30,000 hit on a problem with the system, is that our risk or theirs?
I think it's our risk, but we wouldn't have had the 5 years.
Recognize that in the normal way that this would be done, perhaps in
Yeah.
Michael's proposal, you wouldn't have the money either, because it would have been gone at the end of year 1.
right, so I assume that it's our risk, however, we've never taken a maintenance guarantee, we've never used one in 20 years. We've never used a single maintenance guarantee. And secondly, if there's a defect that's under warranty like that, I think we have more leverage to come against the developer than just a maintenance guarantee. Because we haven't even served the units yet. Or I guess we have, but
Yeah.
if it's a manufacturer's defect, unclear.
Just a question.
So Michael, is that deposit non-interest bearing? In other words, we don't have to, sure, the interest wouldn't be that much, but we don't have to pay any kind of interest on that money back to the developer?
I would think that in trust situations, you do need to segregate that and pay the interest back to the developer. In any trust situations that we have now, the interest money stays with the trust money. So, yeah, I would think that we definitely pay that back to the developer.
So, somebody like to make a motion to approve this?
Sure, I'll move to approve it. I think it's a good solution.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. We've already done 8G, I think. So 8H is discussion and possible action on a request from the district's auditing firm for additional compensation in relation to completing the 2013-14 financial audit. Manager Sharp.
So we've completed our first year audit with Moss Adams, and I've got to say that I think it was done extremely well. It's high quality. Our staff got along exceptionally well. However, after the fact, Moss Adams has requested and put forth the documentation that they spent far exceeded the amount of their contract, and has requested additional compensation of $33,000. This came as a surprise to staff because during meetings with staff and board members, we had never gotten an indication that they were spending extra time, and that there would be a request for additional compensation. The $33,000 represents a 100% increase in their fees. This is our third auditor in 4 years. We had Bob Hayden and we had AKT for 2 years. I think Moss Adams is by far, and Joe can support me on this, was by far the best auditor that we had. And we're looking to build a relationship. For those factors, I propose that we actually split the cost with Moss Adams. However, we do it in such a way that we split the cost over 3 years. And a contingent on paying that $5,000 a year is that the audit is completed on time and on budget. on time being September 30th, I believe, and on budget, that they've already presented a budget for that amount. I think this, in their contract, there is language that says that if they did additional work, that there might be additional charges. I think this recognizes that there was additional work in this first year. It gives them an incentive each year to come in time and on budget, and hopefully it builds a relationship of cooperation and mutual trust that we can build on. So with that,
Mike, I think in the documentation, they claim that they spent time that actually cost them $132,000.
that's correct.
Rather than the original $33,000. And they've discounted that back to an add of $33,000. So now you're suggesting that the $33,000 that they've requested be paid over 3 years, $11,000 a year?
Half of that.
Or half of that?
So splitting that amount with Moss Adams and then paying our portion of that over a 3-year portion contingent on budget and on time.
So what's the budgeted cost for doing the work over the next 3 years? Do we know that for all 3 years, and is it acceptable?
I think it's 33, 34, 35. I think it goes up by $1,000 each year.
But they think they spent $132,000.
Those were billable hours.
Yeah,
That was their
that's the revenue they would charge for it, not what they spent.
Yeah. Based on actual hours, it's their billing rate.
That's their billing rate, yeah.
They knew that some of the additional time was going to be incurred as it was a first-year audit.
Right, but what they're saying is that they're okay with a deal going forward that they're going to be paid $33,000 a year, when it actually took them $132,000 of revenue equivalent billings to do it the first year. So they're going to do it for like a third of the amount of effort next year that they did it for last year. So that's
Well,
what's implied in the numbers.
Yeah, so 2 comments. One, the letter that I signed with board approval, was an estimate of $32,500 for this year, going up $1,000 next year, $1,000 the year after that. So, yeah, we're expecting them to come in at that estimate, and if they do come in at that estimate on time, which is September 30th, I believe, and then the 3rd year is not in the letter at this point, but Michael, the Finance Committee, said we just add $1,000 on, then we pay them the extra $5,500 each year for doing that. And the second thing is, we went around and around the Finance Committee over the last month and a half on this, and I'll just express my view, which is after running it by my 25-year CFO on this kind of thing, because it's an egregious overage. And I think that was just a very nice email saying, hey, here's all this stuff we spent, but here's what we propose, okay? And it's all, like Nate Whaley haggling and positioning. And in fact, I asked Michael to talk to Nate, who had previous experience with Moss Adams, and it all smells just like that. In other words, Nate was proud to be able to negotiate him down to less than 25 cents on the dollar. So that's what's going on. Bob, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think we've covered it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't like the situation, but we think, Al, is there anything you'd like to add or subtract?
No, I think you covered it. There just wasn't a lot of backup for all that additional billing hours they said they.
I think it's
spent.
baloney, but that's just me personally.
So, I'm curious what Plan B is. If they say, okay, we'll compromise, they'll take that 32,000, they'll eat half of that, we're gonna pay the other half of it over 5 years, but some part of the rest of it they don't go along with. What's our Plan B? Just see what.
I don't think there's rest of
That's
it.
not an option. They've said they're gonna take that.
So we pay the other 16.
They're only asking us to pay 33 above what we paid, what we were contracted.
Right, I understand that. What I'm saying is, we're going to them and saying, take 16, asking them to eat 16. However, we've got some conditions on that proposal. And so what I'm saying is, if they agree to the 50-50 there, but they don't agree to coming in on September 30th. I mean, did it come in on September 30th this year?
Approximately, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, it did?
No, it was late.
Yeah, right.
Well, he used the word approximately.
The draft was there.
Would you like to go with flawless?
Oh, okay.
Brilliant.
Okay, all right, so
Yeah, it was-
okay,
it was-
so
it was
then
good.
it's a moot point then, okay, never mind.
I think we'll be fine.
Well, theoretically, it should get easier, because this was their first year.
Yes.
I mean, that was the,
We already have our audit dates set for this next year, so it's a relationship we go forward.
Right, right.
Well, I'll move that we accept Michael's proposal.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. So we're moving on to 8I, which is discussion and possible action regarding the district's snow removal services operation, including a study of a valley-wide residential service. Manager Sharp.
We have met extensively with the Finance Committee and somewhat with planning with regards to the subject. The objectives for converting snow removal from an annual contract to a standard service are to maintain a consistent level of quality through the ability to do multi-year planning, to reduce the overhead for both customers and KMPUD through elimination of annual contracts, and to apply any savings to reduce current prices. And to this end, as you know, we've completed taking the measurements of the asphalt in the common areas. And this information has been placed into a data field that's tied into APN numbers so that we can get to a service area map, which is a part of it. We have had Dick Shanahan draft a rules regulation, which tells us how much per parcel and how actually to do it procedurally. With the help of Bob Epstein, the data will be stored into the report server with changes easily made and, if approved, tied into our billing software. This will help to determine, where we need to go. With our first calculations, it was extremely difficult to tie it into square footage numbers because of the different complexities of each of the unit types and how much it costs to actually do snow removal. One site might have a hill on it, one might be totally flat, but the square footage is the same, so you have variations in that. So we've reverted more to a time that it takes to complete those projects. And in the past, during the 2006, 2007, and 2008 period, we actually did time tracking to establish what our rates would be for the contracts. The contracts that we have now are all based on how much time it takes. So we have started with this last storm to actually actively, aggressively time track once again to validate our numbers going forward. And if this is approved, an idea would be to validate that every certain number of years, maybe every 3 years. So we are in the process of establishing a baseline once again to verify what our numbers were before. We're actively time tracking these. And all of this information be once again presented to the Planning and Finance Committee. I think that we'll be able to come up with a solid recommendation to the board at the next board meeting as far as what the rates should be and for each of the different classes of ownership. So I'm optimistic that we can get there, especially with a new matrix rather than square foot going to a time matrix.
Well, I have two questions before I open it up. Actually, since it's been considered by the Planning and Finance Committee, is there anything you want to say?
Well, the proposed switch to time was a new item when we had the planning committee meeting just a couple of days ago, so I don't know that I've really mulled that over. I mean, if that's the only practical approach, it's the only practical approach, but it's less intuitive in my mind, so that's kind of the thing that threw me a bit. But I think we just got to press forward and come up with a good quantitative proposal and see if it holds water. So, or we're going into it, the finance committee really doing the hard work on it at this point.
No, I'd say the goal here is not to have anybody pay more next year than they're paying this year. And just say, well, what are our actual savings in going to this scheme like that, and how can we apply that?
We're citing the objectives you're working on, or we're working on.
Well, the three that Michael mentioned, which is consistent level of service, reduce overhead, and take the savings and apply those to reduce the costs. So those are the three objectives.
Yeah, I think the main comment I made at the planning committee meeting was just how do we factor in the widely varying years of snow, and how, so some years we'll be in deficit, other years we may be in surplus. Do we have a rate stabilization fund? Do we have a reserve? Do we change rates each year based on what happened the previous year? I'm not sure how we handle that. We've got a mechanism for handling it now, but I don't know what we have in this proposed kind of approach.
So my two questions, I'm going to direct the first one to you, Dick, is Bob Endy just said, hey, the per square foot thing was pretty intuitive. I mean, everybody understands how many, but it didn't work. It doesn't fit with our cost structure, which I think I actually believe in. I believe the district has refined that in a robust manner, through experience over many years. But is it legal to go to what we're talking about here, which is, we're going to lock all the the customers into a rate that the local agency sort of sets itself through periodic review?
Yes, it's legal, and I recently talked with Michael about this time study and using that as the base upon which to build these rates, and it is a lawful approach. These will be different rates than you've ever set before, because these are going to be voter-approved rates. Under Prop 218, property-related services generally all require a majority vote before they're approved, except water, sewer, and garbage collection. And so previously, your water, sewer, and garbage, you're familiar with that. You don't need to go to the voters with those because they're exempt under Prop 218. This is a new service charge for you. It doesn't fit within an exemption from the vote, so you got to go to a vote. So so there's going to have to be property owner buy-in, and the voters will actually approve the rates that you propose.
Does that mean if we want to change rates from year to year because of the variability of conditions that we have to go back to the voters to?
Perhaps. As you move forward, one of the things to look at is you can ask voters to approve, formulas and adjustments and factors. On the other part of that scale, you make it too complicated, and the ballot question gets a little. Then you may draw more no votes because people just don't understand it. So you need to make it understandable and presentable. But what Prop 218 also requires on the substantive side of things is that the costs be spread so that each parcel bears its proportional cost of the service. And what's unique is it's got to be a parcel-based analysis, because these are going to be voted on by owners of parcels. And as Michael explained to me, when you look at snow removal service costs, they very much are driven by time. More time equates to more labor, equates to more fuel usage, equates to more wear and tear on equipment. So I think using a time-based formula is directly related to cost proportionality and is a good foundation upon which to build. And if you've got a database there to spread the costs from association to association, you can do that. What I told Michael is then you need to take the next step within each association. You then need to take those costs and spread them per parcels within that association. That then becomes your rate. And the detailed questions are critical ones on the variability of your different snow years, and how you adjust them year to year without locking in, because you certainly want to avoid having to go to the voters every year or every other year. You don't want to have to do that too frequently because of the risk of a no vote.
Well, you have one question for you. Some of the parcels are timeshares, so they only get one vote, but there's 8 owners. So how does that normally handle?
Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So does each I've done a lot of 218 work, and I've never had that question. Does each timeshare ownership interest have an APN? No. So it's really going to be APN driven.
Yes, it's APN. There's one APN.
There's one APN number, and so then, and one of the things that's critical, and I'm going to need to tweak them. Michael referenced early these Prop 218 rules that are going to be presented to the board,
right.
and we'll address those, because part of the problem is with 218, that's in our Constitution. The constitutional provisions on the protest hearing and the election are all found in about 4 sentences. And so the details are not presented in the Constitution. Our legislature hasn't been really good about giving us details through statute. So what a lot of the local agencies are doing is adopting in-house rules. So when you go forward with one of these, you need clear, and we need to add a category to that resolution for timeshares in terms of, but basically the way it works is the ballot goes to the property owner as shown on the APN records from that we're going to get from the county, and then it gets returned. And whoever returns that ballot, if there's 8 owners, they kind of need to figure out who's the representative with the responsibility to handle that. And as a practical matter, it's going to go through probably the association that manages the timeshare. But it really goes to whatever address is on that APN.
The quality of the county's data is a little bit less than flawless.
Yep.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and that's all we have.
I know.
Yeah,
Okay.
we just go to the last equalized assessment.
Okay, so we'll figure it into our rules how to handle fractional ownership.
Yep.
Okay.
So 2 quick questions, if I could. Michael, wasn't there something different about driveways? Driveways were not going to be done on the hourly basis, if I recall.
Yeah, so we pulled driveways out of the common area equation. And so if you have a driveway, whether you live in East Meadows, or if you live in KMA, if you live in Palisades, Settles West, any of those, you get a additional bill.
And that's not going to be done on an hour's basis, it's just going to be something else.
The driveways seem to fall into 3 categories currently.
So when you say you'll
That
get,
was
which are?
decide
What's that? Well, some of them are shared driveways. So, right, so the cost to plow them is not like 2 separate driveways. And then a couple of the driveways have exceptionally long lengths and difficult. So that's,
Right.
Yeah.
So there's really small driveways, there's really, really big driveways, and then there's the portage that's just right.
yeah. And so, given all that, well, first of all, in the driveway thing, can an individual opt out? Is that what you're saying?
yeah.
Yeah, East Meadows would be extremely difficult because of the CC&Rs, but.
Oh, well, also the requirement is the homeowners association provides no removal service for the driveway. So,
Definitely any of the others would opt out, not a problem.
okay. So even in East Meadows, I don't know how you force them into it.
I believe it's a requirement of the subdivision, I don't think
Right.
it's a CC&Rs, it's a requirement of the subdivision that our driveways all have snow removal service.
And that the association is responsible for making that happen.
Yeah, that's what I believe is right.
So, I mean, leads to my other second question, which is timeline-wise, is this realistic? I mean, your timeline up there talks about a public hearing in January.
No, in February,
What year?
next year.
It does have a sense of humor.
Are you guys sure?
Right
you're
after
gonna
the
go down this road?
right after your assessment on unimproved properties for future benefit. It'll be in the afternoon.
So,
You have the
what does that say? Public hearing notice, January?
In January, and then you actually have the public hearing in February.
Okay. So with all this complexity, is that realistic?
I think that a length of time to validate our time spent on, completing the projects and validating our current rates to make sure that we're in good shape, as long of a period of time that the board feels comfortable with, it will be the factor on whether this is a this year or next year issue. But we'll have a recommendation on how to move forward at the next board meeting, which will be a topic of when the next board meeting is later in this.
January 31st.
There you
Michael,
go.
I'll just share an observation, with respect, it's aggressive.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Bob, can I just address a question? I've got my KMA hat on now. So if I was talking to a KMA property owner and I say, you have, you're a property owner, you pay property taxes, you can expect to be a part of this service. And the reason why I'm saying that is because developed or undeveloped property in KMA, everybody shares in Snow removal. Okay, just want to make sure.
And you can also tell them their KMA dues will go down.
Well, that's up to KMA.
Yeah, well, yes, they could, KMA got a savings equivalent to what
Right.
they'd be paid.
How will the dues go down?
Well, because the KMA would no longer have to collect the costs of servicing the
Oh,
property
okay,
owner would
right,
pay
right.
directly.
So you'll
It's
pay
not, and
directly.
it's not just the roads, I mean, we've got common areas too.
Yeah,
right?
right.
So, and
Yes,
that's all
that's
to be figured into the rates that you're gonna.
And the association dues would probably go down a lot, certainly in East Meadows they would, because I think something like 2/3 or more of the cost of the association dues is snow removal.
Right.
But the way you describe it, you won't be getting out of, this is a question, will you not be getting out of individual contracts with homeowners for their driveways? You'll still have to do that?
No, I don't believe you will. They can opt out of having that bill on their regular.
So there'll be no contract, there'll just be a yes or no?
Checkbox.
One small additional point in the process as described, Dick, in your memos was, it said that the district clerk was going to be the one that did the election, the tally of the ballots. I would just propose that if we do it that way, that's fine, but I think it should be, somebody should look over her shoulder. It's an important task, and we're the ones that are asking to make the change, and us count the ballots. It seems like an inherent conflict of interest we should avoid.
Plus, I think she should supply muffins for those who are looking over.
In fair comment, in other agencies, because of that concern, they have brought in a consultant, or they've relied on the county elections office.
Yeah.
And those are all options for the board moving forward. When you see that rules resolution item, when that comes before you, that's when you're gonna be asked to make these kind of policy judgment on things like that, and that's certainly an option. What's proposed is the lowest cost option. As you start using these other methods, there's gonna be more fees involved.
Anything else on this topic?
No, we'll bring this back before the board with our recommendation.
And you're just looking for direction and directions to proceed?
Yes, sir.
And I think that the objectives are the right objectives, the three we outlined.
I agree with that.
I do too. 8J is discussion and possible approval, and this is the last one, under 8. Discussion and possible approval of task order from Bennett Engineering in developing a project description for the Caples Lake water rights application with the State Water Board and the Department of Public Health. Michael Sharp and Matt Wheeler.
As the board is aware, we've been working with the planning committee on establishing or perfecting our water rights to Caples Lake. And one of the first hurdles to get over is to make sure that we actually have a project in the eyes of the Department of Public Health Drinking Water Division. So Matt and I went down to Sacramento and met with our representative and just to ask him about the project and see what their general thoughts were. And Matt's been nice enough to come up today and give us a presentation.
Welcome.
Thank you, and appreciate being here. As part of this item, we have a task order for preparing, for providing technical engineering support to the district as part of this process. Beginning of the year, we outlined the approach to going after water rights for surface water source augmentation for the district. And as part of that, detailed several steps that are going to need to be done along the way, and the district has embarked on those. These include working with legal counsel to go after the permits with Department of Water Resources, State Water Resource Control Board, includes environmental analysis and evaluation, and there's going to be some technical aspects of that, and so that's what this proposal is to do, is to provide that technical end. As we move through the project, we've got preliminary engineering, evaluations, design and construction, and this task order and this proposal is just for that first piece to assist with the front-end planning, some initial evaluation, project vetting, and to provide those technical project descriptions that are going to be part of applications for water rights, environmental analyses, and the like, possibly discussions with current owners of facilities that we might be tying into or acquiring. And so to that end, I can talk to some of the work that we've done so far. working with staff and working with the State Water Board, now in control of the Department of Drinking Water Services. We can go over the details of that, or I can answer any questions you might have.
Maybe I can provide some background. So we went down and met with the Department of Public Health, and the initial fears of the district was the proximity of the snowmaking line to the sewer system. And I thought that was the biggest impact that we would have. And Michael Tolan with the department was much more interested in what the end treated water was like than what the water going forward was. So it was a big surprise, and it really kind of told us that we actually do have a project moving forward, and that the transmission line was a viable, the snow removal or the snowmaking line was a viable transmission line to us, because he didn't have a requirement of moving it 10 feet from the waste order lines that are currently there. The items that he did have concerns with, one was the ownership of the line itself, which is not a deal killer, but he felt, and probably very prudent for the board to consider, that any infrastructure that we have control and ownership of. So we either have an ironclad agreement with Vail Resorts on the use of this line, or we actually own this line for the future. And of course, all of this is leading up to a water rights application and a project description. So we met the district engineer in the hallway, and he basically asked us to provide a project description. You know, this is all fine and good, but can you get down your thoughts on paper so that we can run it up the chain, and we give you any other advice that we would have. And a project description is exactly what we're looking for the State Water Resources, for the state board, for the water rights application. So I've asked Matt to come together with the task order to provide those two items to us so that we can move forward. I think it's important to realize that both of these, that Matt Wheeler's costs have always been included in the $50,000 that the board has already approved, and this is the formalization of his already anticipated work. So we've had the water rights person, we have the environmental, we always knew that we would have Matt and Dick's time to work on this as well, and the board approved a $50,000 allocation to pursue this. What staff is doing is just formalizing that with Matt with an actual proposal, which is before you today. So with that, staff has reviewed this proposal and recommends approval by the board.
Doesn't seem very controversial to me, but are there any comments from the board or the audience?
Yeah, the more we get into this, the less enthusiastic I am about the whole project, I have to be honest. And it has to do with the state of the snowmaking line. It's 25 years old, it's starting to fail. I know this from personal experience. Currently, there's a hole in the line in the lake. I think going forward, if we do get the water rights, I think we'd be better off building a new line ourselves and owning it. I see it, originally the concept is that we were going to share an asset, and I see it becoming a liability, personally, I really do. So I think that any study that we do should include what it would cost to build a state-of-the-art line that's designed to move drinking water, not something that's designed to provide snowmaking. Because these are two very different concepts, in my opinion, in terms of quality. I wouldn't build a steel line to transport drinking water at this point in time. I would recommend using plastic or some other material. The problems with a snowmaking line is it sits empty much of the time. You trap water in there, the water freezes, and cracks the pipe. I know because I've welded it.
When you say the snowmaking line is 25 years old, I think it was run through the meadow in '98. Is there part of it that's older?
Was it 98?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's...
I'm not saying it's in good shape.
Approximately 25.
We heard the welds weren't inspected.
Well, they weren't X-ray. I'm nervous about using that, and I still think that we should explore drilling more wells. I think it's more cost effective, personally. Dr. Curry identified successfully our 2 wells that we found on the first drill. And we just did extensive testing on our aquifer this summer. After 3 years of drought, we did a drawdown test, and my impression is that the test was fairly favorable. I just see there's so many possible ways that this could end up costing us a lot of money and not get the results that we want. I'm really less than enthusiastic about this.
Well, so let me try and divide up your less than enthusiastic into categories. One is the snowmaking line. I understand that.
Yeah.
2, you think it could cost a lot of money, but my understanding is procuring the water rights is kind of an option. Is that it's a $50,000 potential option. That's not a cheap option.
Yeah, it doesn't require us to proceed. That's your point. We just want to get, perfect our rights, as the expression is.
Right. And so, are you have
Well,
reservations against the option?
There's some unknowns there too. I mean, if somebody protests it, the legal costs are they could skyrocket, right? Is that correct?
Sure. So far, I think we feel, all right, this is a question. Do we feel that we have a relatively clean path through in terms of protests?
I believe we do, and that was really the reason for scheduling this first meeting with the Department of Drinking Water Services. We wanted to know if there was an Achilles heel going into this before we went way down the road of trying to secure these water rights, to know if the snowmaking line was a viable option, because it is a piece of infrastructure in the ground. And to construct a new line out of Caples Lake in a new location, we're going through Forest Service property, going through a lot of heavy lifting environmentally to try and do that. And even if the snowmaking line has problems that need to be addressed, knowing what would be acceptable from the drinking water department who gives us a water system permit standpoint, identifying that early was part of the goal of this meeting. Finding out that they didn't take exception to the separation requirements was a big piece, because if you look at the rules and regs, a raw water transmission main a new one needs to meet those setback requirements. And so they identified, or Michael Tolan identified, several steps that we can take to perform bacteriological testing, iron bacteria testing, and coliform testing on that line that we should probably start doing early in this process to see if there are problems. But know that it's a raw water transmission main. And we have steel raw water transmission mains all over the counties on the other side of the mountain that are conveying for drinking water. After it comes out of that raw water main, it goes into a surface water treatment plant. And we have to run that through, no matter how clean the water is in Caples Lake, it's a surface water. And so if it's got any kind of pollutants in it, they're going to be addressed under the surface water treatment rule. If we see iron bacteria, if we see even fecal coliform, it's going to be removed as part of the process. And that's all part of the technical analysis as well, and would be part of our system permit. And so, yes, we want to identify that before we would accept taking on a new piece of infrastructure. If we were going to assume ownership of that line or the intake pumps, we'd want to identify the condition they're in, the condition they need to be in for use, and what cost liability we'd see going forward. And that would all come out as part of the analysis before we started exercising those rights.
So I actually sympathize with Peter's comments, and I don't know, there may be good ways to, put a sleeve in that pipe and make it more durable, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. But the intent of this effort really was just to secure rights as a backup to if and when the wells are not sufficient for build-out, to support the build-out in this community. That's really all, I know that's all I wanted to get accomplished on this. I didn't want to get to system design. For all I know, we'd use the water to, I guess we may need a new tank. Maybe the tank is just for fire protection. Maybe rather than using domestic, treated water for fire protection, we just take it from the lake and we make sure the tank is always full. Maybe we use it for irrigation. some, I mean, maybe we don't use it for drinking water. Maybe we supplement, we don't use well water for these other non-potable uses. I don't know. See, that's why I've kept saying, but we've gotten advice from Dick that, and I think, I'm sure it's correct, that we have to go through this project description. I mean, in my view, it's premature, because all I want to do is say, since the court judgment of whenever it was, 10 or 15 years ago, established that the upcountry users have the right to use 200 acre-feet out of Caples and Silver Lake, and we're basically the only upcountry use that can make much use of that. What we're requesting is about 60% of that. That's all we want. We want just to perfect that right. I mean, that's all I've ever wanted. But now, to do that, apparently we need to go through a project description. To go through a project description, we need to say, well, this is what the water would be used for, and this is how it would be transmitted, and this is the kind of treatment plant that we would have. So it's going a lot farther than I had thought. In a way, I think we're going, I mean, if we have to, we have to, but, you know, we may find that this line, as Peter says, really isn't appropriate to us. But I'm not prepared to establish a project budget, or, I mean, we may not do this, we might not use that water for 10 or 15 years, we don't know.
So do you think we should approve this motion or not?
If this is the minimum necessary to to perfect our right to 120 acre-feet of water out of Caples Lake, then yes. If this goes farther than we need to, then no.
Okay, so my understanding in the discussions which you and I have both been in is that the answer is that we do need to have a project description in order to move forward with with the pursuit of perfecting our water rights. So this question, I think, has been answered. I look to you to tell me if I missed anything, but I think the answer is we need to do this step if we're going to move forward on perfecting the water rights. I think what I heard today, and I absolutely empathize with the points that you brought up. My reaction to it is if we think that the water line, the snowmaking line, may be insufficient down the road, then maybe it would be the smart play in the project description to say that we might have an alternative to using the snowmaking line. Leave the wording of the project description broad enough so that we have not boxed ourselves into just doing one thing. You know, if Eric says, geez, it might be smart to use it for irrigation, well, maybe we should say in the project description, we might just use this water for irrigation as well as using it for drinking water or exclusively for irrigation. Don't know, too far down the road to be able to tell the answer to that. We might say in the project description, we might have to sleeve the line to maintain the snowmaking line, or it might say we might replace it with a completely new line. Let's just not limit our options if it's possible to do it that way.
I think the question here is, do we want to pursue water out of Caples Lake, or do we want to pursue water from other sources? And from what I got from previous board meetings is that we want to pursue it from Caples Lake. I think it's important to identify a project, whether we do this specific project or not, is not in this scope. This scope is defining a project. As long as the future boards realize that if we modify the project in a dramatic fashion, that's going to have its own set of approvals. If you decide to put a waste treatment plant in the Caples Lake parking lot, you're going to have to go through approval process to do that. This project, as defined, has the least amount of environmental impact and thereby has the best chance of passing through the State Water Resources Board, because there isn't a huge new construction item that would have to be analyzed along with the simple use of a snowmaking line. The beauty of this project is the infrastructure is there, and the only thing that we're adding to it is a treatment facility that can be easily defined in a project description, and that's why staff is coming to the board to describe a project that will get us what our goal is, and that is our perfection of rights for the least amount of money and trouble possible.
Well, if the project description were going to be, whereas Bob suggested, basically outlining some possible uses of the water, Does that make anything more complicated at this point?
As long as we don't get into infringing on any other stakeholders' rights, irrigation would be fine, use of the water. I mean, we have to figure out how we would actually do that, but.
Right, but I don't think hopefully we don't need to, that's why I'm wondering, we don't need to figure out how we would do it. What we want to do is leave our options open. We just want to know we have access to that water to support build-out, should it come to pass that our existing wells, or a new well we may want to drill. We may decide in 5 years, let's go drill for a new well. Can't provide. So so the minimum work and cost necessary to accomplish that is what I'm after.
Right, and by defining it as a drinking water supply, we've covered all of those other bases for irrigation, for other domestic uses, because it's the hardest one to get. Michael's correct in that we are defining currently the project as the least environmental impact project. Building a small treatment plant building next to well number 2, using existing pipelines, using existing.
Would replacing the existing pipeline but in the same alignment?
Right, if you went with a sleeving or a pipe bursting type project where you weren't doing open construction through Forest Service land, then that would be a similar small impact. And we would cover that in the project description that would be discussed in the environmental document. The project description toward the State Water Board for water rights may not need to include that level of detail, and so you tailor it to whichever application we're going for.
So, I mean, I'm trying to get to closure here, but do we want to go for this with the provision that the project description is reviewed by and recommended by the planning committee? I mean, you guys have listened to more of this and considered more.
I brought this point up that I'm making now. I brought this up continuously, but if this is the minimum necessary, and I looked at Michael and Dick, this is the minimum necessary in order to perfect our rights, then this is what we need to do. And I'm not saying that I'm ultimately for a project that would involve building a new pipeline. I'm not saying that I don't want to drill for a new well. I'm just saying that I would like the rights to 120 acre-feet of water out of Caples for use at some point.
And you're estimating that we can do this for $50,000. Is that correct?
We're estimating that we can get the water, right? If we get no protest, staff's report to the district is that if we got no protest, we can get the initial charges with the filing fee of $10,000, we can get it into the state. Whether we could get that all the way through and get the permit in hand depends on the protests and procedures that are followed.
Dick, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, Eric, I just want to comment, Eric, on your observations that you just want to get the right in hand. One thing important about a California water right is, assuming the State Water Resources Control Board issues you that permit to appropriate and use water from Caples Lake, the district then has a duty to make diligent efforts to put that water to reasonable and beneficial use in your service area. And if over a period of time you don't do that and the permit just sits there without any action on it, you're going to lose that right. So water rights in California, you'll hear the expression, use it or lose it, and that generally is the rule in California. There's exceptions to that and other things, but I don't want the district going down this path thinking that, well, let's just get the permit and just get it in hand in case we may need to use it 10, 20, 30 years from now. It's not going to work that way.
Well, how soon would we have to make use of the permit?
You'll have to file progress reports with the state board showing your reasonable efforts. And reasonable efforts can include, planning and financing and additional reviews, but eventually you've got to put a shovel in the ground figuratively to actually pull water out of the lake. So rule of thumb is you better show some good progress in 5 years.
If I may, the other piece this will give us is an indication of what kind of mitigation measures might be necessary to use the water. And if we find that exercising those water rights includes things that we haven't accounted for in a surface water treatment plant, it's going to include other things, restrictions or whatnot, we can compare that to the other outlined options in the capacity report for getting additional water. We know that we're going to have a deficit going into build out. We've identified an additional 2 wells, what it might cost to do 2 more wells in the district, how adding storage in the district can also help to meet that maximum day demand requirement. And then we can evaluate, is going forward with the surface water project the right project, or is seeking new wells and adding storage the option to go with? But then you have both in hand that you can choose. Right now, we know that we would like to have surface water, and we think that it might be the most appropriate, but we don't know all the details until we get that feedback.
Any comments from either the public or silent director, Commissioner Epstein? I like Commissioner Rickard.
Me too. I like it too. What does it mean?
Rickard.
Like,
Well, while they're formulating their brilliant comments.
Yeah.
Is there anything we should be thinking about if, let's say that we actually did a project, who knows, but if we did a project, should we be thinking about Russ financing for it? There's a water part of Russ, and it says, as long as we haven't started the project yet, remember we got wrapped around the axle on electric because we didn't talk to Russ soon enough? Let's not do the same thing here.
I'm not up to speed as much as I should be on the water part of the program as far as what those requirements are, Bob, so I really can't speak to that.
But yes, there are. We've had several clients participate in those programs. And for whatever reason, it's USDA RD. Electricity's RUS, water and sewers, I think it stands for rural development.
Actually, RUS is part of my D too.
Is it? Okay, yeah, so, yeah.
Okay. We'll talk about that later.
Alan, did you raise your hand?
Just a question, if it's a use it or lose it kind of situation with the water rights, and the state's already kind of penciled out 200 acre feet, what's the rush to secure them? Is there alternative uses, people that could come in and get them first?
Want me to answer that?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, it kind of gets back to this question of project description. You got to have a project. If you don't have a project, don't go to the state water board and ask for water rights. And the reason you need, and then the other corollary to that, we haven't talked much about it, the reason you need to have a project is the most important document the state water board is going to be interested in is the environmental review document that comes along with your application. That's going to talk about the environmental impacts of the project that you propose undertaking. That's also going to get into the mitigation measures that are required to mitigate potential impacts. And so that's why you need to know why you want this water and what you intend to do with it. Is the water going to be there 10 years from now? Is that reservation going to be available 10 years from now? Boy, California water is just such an iffy issue, you just don't know. We're not making any more of it, and the shortages and shortages. So I think it's prudent to try to secure that water supply for your community.
But if we're not planning on moving forward with a project in a 5-year time frame, why are we even talking about this?
Well, I think part of the reason is, and following up on what Matt said, is you're eventually going to need additional water supplies, and taking steps towards acquiring this permit are going to answer a lot of unknowns that you don't have answered yet, and will help you better evaluate, is this the most cost-effective option to have additional water for the community, or do we have such problems trying to secure the water right and the expenses start to go up that additional groundwater wells and storage start to look more cost-effective? It'll help you, I think, answer that question as you move forward.
So what I think Alan is saying, and what Dick is agreeing with, his possible approach is to actually do the project description, because that sounds like it's needed to identify our future needs, but come back before the board before we entertain the $10,000 filing fee with the state board and the additional costs that the water engineer would have to perfect these at these times until we get board direction, unless we already have that.
Mike, if I could just interject, I mean, the board will absolutely be involved before you apply for the permit, because you'll need to certify the environmental document. So that'll also answer a lot of the questions of what are we going to do with this water, where's it coming from, how's it going to be used, and that's a key document in the process, and that should come to the board before you actually apply to the state. Because otherwise, then the state will do your environmental review for you, and you don't want that to happen.
So this is the first part of a $50,000 commitment.
And the environmental document that we're talking about is part of the $50,000?
So listening to all that, do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, staff continues to recommend the project description by Matt Wheeler as proposed for $5,500, which has previously been approved by the board as part of this project. This is just a refining of that amount, so staff wanted to come back and formalize that approval. And we will come back before the board before we spend any of those other funds on a case-by-case basis.
Does the planning committee have any recommendation?
I think this is a good step. I think we need to make sure, as Eric has reiterated, that it has to be the minimum necessary to try to perfect the rights. Not build a Rolls Royce and take a drive around the block.
Well, we have committed probably the $50,000 expenditure. I mean, we got to come back. This is the first step of the $50,000.
Right, well, we've had, we've spent some of
So I guess my only, first of all, I'll make the motion to approve it with the caveat that the project description be written as generally as possible and get reviewed by the planning committee.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
No.
I'm sorry.
No.
You vote no? Okay.
Yeah, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have a problem with it, but nothing's normal these days. We've just incurred this huge debt. I just think the timing's wrong. That's all I can say.
Bob, how do you vote?
I'm in favor.
Sorry about that, Peter.
No, that's okay. No, that's all right.
So we're done with item 8. Item 9 is going to be the shortest manager's report in history.
It will. I'd like to defer on the GM report.
I think you're supposed to say, looks good to me. I think
Sounds good to me. Operations report?
Unless there's any questions from the
Perfect.
board from the packet.
looks good to him too.
Electric propane systems report. I'm afraid it's not so easy, Brandy.
I would be willing to do the same thing.
Okay. Is there anything we should know other than what Michael talked about at the outset?
We talked about most of it. The forecasting is going fine. That's about it.
Okay.
This is a chart that Brandy put together that shows our forecast compared to our actual for our Cal ISO. And you can see.
Which colors are
Red is the actual and blue is the forecast.
You can see on certain periods we thought that they would make snow and they didn't, or things like that. This will even out better once we get into higher numbers because the matrix is off right now because it's much slower than small numbers.
And anything else on propane or electricity?
We also had a repair of an emergency shutoff valve for our propane system. It was part of our delivery service, but that was taken care of this week. And other than that, all the out valley has already been reported.
Thank you.
Brandy, what's the status of building some security fence around the propane?
It's something we're still looking into. We have not been able to move forward with that yet.
And D is administrative report?
I can go through it, or I can take any questions on financials, however you want me to handle that.
What would you
I had a question, but
Michael, do you recommend we go through it, or?
I recommend we go through it.
Okay, let's go through it.
Sorry.
Do we do performance reporting and financials?
Yes, please.
Okay. For performance reporting, November was down from plan in all services. Snowmaking was down for the resort in November, and the resort didn't open for Thanksgiving as planned. For electric, our unmetered percentage is still higher than we anticipated. With being online, we're showing a 10% unmetered. There's still some unknowns with the out valley line loss, but for things that we're doing currently in-house is Brandy's staff is taking a look at the old route sheets from Mountain Utilities and comparing them to our current route sheets to go through and see if maybe there's any meters missing. And it's our plan to also do manual reads, at least start with the commercial large electric meters and make sure that what we're, since we remote meter, do some spot checking at least, and later on do a full manual meter read if needed to make sure that our metering is working okay. With propane, just to mention, our unmetered percentage actually shows negative in November, which is great. Really the reason is we don't have a great system for taking our tank levels for propane right now. We brought this up before. So we are looking at doing some upgrades to that. But at this time, it's probably going to have to wait until after the winter. If we do that, we would have to relight every pilot light in the valley, and it doesn't seem like that's a great option at this point. If there's no questions, I will move on to...
I'll just ask one. I mean, I'm really dissatisfied with our inability of finding out where all the waste is. And you know, something has to change, because this can't go on indefinitely. And why would the spinning reserve be double now that we have Out Valley, for example? And that's under our control. Load test?
I mean, the generators have to be tested.
Are you talking about spinning reserve line loss? That's a percentage, isn't it?
98,000.
98,000 kilowatt hours.
Yeah, that's
Up
just the
from 55,000 when it used to run full time.
Yeah, it's a percentage of, it's not an accurate number, it's just a percentage of total production.
Spinning reserve line loss, line 2.
Yeah, it just comes from the budget.
It is an allocation for spinning reserve line loss. There is no spinning reserve in November because we weren't on. So it's an allocation of whatever percentage of production. It's not a true number. It's an allocation of how much we feel line in the budget, how much we accounted for line loss. It's not an actual number. We don't know what our actual numbers, and Bob, I agree with you, you know, our loss percentages are high, but that's just not one of them.
Okay.
So what you're saying is these are just line items that lead up to total budgeted meter. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that the one line that he picked out with the 98,000 is not a metered line loss. This is what we, in the budget, we allocate for line loss throughout the valley and the Out Valley project. So
It doesn't say budgeted on it, but it should.
Yes.
Right. So this is what we budgeted. Above and beyond that 98 is what the 10% recommend. So our unmetered total is actually 198 plus 70. So an electric system always has line loss.
Right.
It costs money to heat up transformers. You have inefficient lines going through it. So your line loss, so what we did is we have a budget, a standardized percentage that we used. In fact, the finance committee assisted with, you know, what percentage would be Out Valley line loss, what would be in Valley. We came up with a percentage. That's what the 98% indicates, is that percentage of anticipated line loss. Above and beyond that is our unmetered total, and that is the number that we're trying to perfect to and to reduce. We anticipate we'll have line loss. That's budgeted for. Over and above that line loss is the other line.
And I guess, is the 98,000 as a percentage of 700,000, what's that, 15, 12, 13%? Is that like an industry standard? Would that be considered best practice?
I think it's based on what we've seen in the past, plus calculations of what we thought the Out Valley line would be in line loss, what the powerhouse would be in line loss, and what the distribution system would be in line loss. So it's a combination of the three. No, not all. Most utilities don't have a 26-mile distribution system, and most utilities don't have a powerhouse as well, so our line losses are higher than other utilities. And then conversely, most utilities are so much bigger that these line losses are nothing to them, but they mean a big deal to us because we're so much smaller. So one of those transformers up by the powerhouse has a tremendous amount of line loss to it. It makes nothing to PG&E, but it makes a huge difference to us because the number of customers that have and the amount of kilowatts that we're generating.
Okay, but we got rid of the step up from 480 to 12,000, and we replaced that with a step down of 35,000 to 12,000. Right?
Actually, we still have to power one of those four step down transformers to keep the house lights on.
Okay, and then the three numbers that add the 700,013 is actual metered line loss plus house usage and unmetered total. Those are the three lines that are supposed to add up? Anyway, rather than taking more time in this meeting, I think we really have to make some progress on this.
As we've discussed.
Yes.
So this is in the Operations Committee's purview, right? The Planning Committee created the performance reports, and then we punted under the Operations Committee to aggressively work on improvement plans to try to get the waste out of the system. I think when you earlier expressed frustration that there was inadequate progress, I'd share that. I don't think we've yet grappled with this, and I think it's got to be grappled with in the Operations Committee. I think this is where we've said that responsibility currently lies. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, I agree there needs to be progress. Looking at this sheet, both in terms of fundamental progress and how we calculate and report it. Let's keep going.
For October financials, the balance sheet shows that operating cash at October is 1.7 million, about 750,000 down from plan. I brought this up, the reasons for this before. There's 350,000 in COP interest that was budgeted to be paid in December, and it's actually paid in September. And then there's 420,000 in RUS interest expense that was previously budgeted to be paid out of the RUS project fund, but according to our auditors needs to be paid out of operating as with all of the other loan payments. For income statement, unless there's questions.
Yeah, why don't you hit the highlights?
Okay. For combined, November actually just about met plan. Operating, we're just down 1,600 from plan. Year-to-date operating is up 80,000 from plan. A lot of that is due to district staff spending time on Out Valley and capital projects. One thing to note on interest expense, we can see that that is down of about 227,000 from budget. This is a change that Moss Adams brought to our attention. We were calculating expensed interest for the RUS and capitalized interest the wrong way from prior auditors' information. And this will end in November with the project complete, and we'll be expensing the interest. But we have met with them, and this is a true savings. It won't catch up once we expense.
So for year-to-date, so from July 1st through October, which are some of our skinniest months, essentially, we are $325,900 better than planned.
Yes, and 227 of that is due to the interest expense.
That's good.
And everything else really for October is pretty straightforward. There's nothing big on there, so unless there's questions.
Can I ask a question regarding snow removal? So the
Not in October, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, well, our contract says we pay a certain amount of money in October, but it's not reflected in there. So what I'm trying to figure out is, if you have contracts that are gonna say you're gonna pay 4 different times, why wouldn't there be any recognition of that revenue in there? And why wouldn't you have budgeted?
The way we budget it is from November through May. The contract period is October 15th through May 15th, so I guess the half month catches up in May.
Yeah, accrual accounting would say you
Right.
recognize it as you
Right.
deliver the service,
Right.
not when you.
I mean,
pay
I
cash.
realize it all catches up to you at the end, but.
So the only thing I was missing, what my question was there a cash flow? Did I miss that board packet, or did I?
I have it on here, I believe, but I noticed that I thought it was in the packet. I
Can it
just
be
realized that.
sent, Or put
Sure.
it on the website so other people can see it, but that's the one I'd like to.
Yes, I'll
see-
show that.
see where we're going.
Can you
For
put it up
November,
there?
it's showing 1.785, and something to bring up on that also. We were previously projecting our lowest cash to be in December. That was because we were going to have a COP and a RUS payment in December, when actually the COP payments are now due in September and March. So our lowest point is showing in March, and we'll continue to do that. Our March low is at about 1.4 million, because we're paying, it's our first principal payment on both the COP and the RUS, and they're both coming in March.
Again, I don't want to, probably now is not the time to discuss it, but somehow I'd like to understand how we can be, on an income basis, not necessarily a cash basis, but an income basis, we're $326,000 better than planned, but on a cash basis, we're like $700,000 worse than planned.
That's really the interest that I'm showing. Yes, we're capitalizing more on the income statement, but for the auditors, all of this money needs to come from operating cash.
So I guess my last question is since we thought that a minimum healthy balance for us is $2 million and we're going to hit $1.4 million, should we be taking some extraordinary measures at this point?
I have started an updated forecast, some what ifs in the winter. I didn't have it prepared for this meeting, but it is definitely something we're looking at.
Yeah, I guess I can't quite picture why we're in this situation. That's all.
My guess is it's because it's our first year of forecasting principal and interest repayments from these massive loans.
Yes.
So I'm not sure how much burden it is on you, but I think it'd be great if we could have a cash forecast out another even 12 months from this as soon as you can. I recognize you don't have a budget for next year.
We do, and that, I guess that's the question. I can do it. We have the 5-year plan, and it's a 5-year balance sheet, but there are some, changes that should be made to that, and I can easily do that. The misbudgeting of the COP payments, if I can correct those and maybe give a updated budget and the reasons for updating that.
If it's not a lot of work, I'd appreciate that. I know it's a mid-year request, but I share Eric's nervousness, and I've shared it with Michael, saying we better be right on our debt repayment, or we're going to look like, yeah. So if you could do that before the January, in advance of the January board, in advance of the January Finance Committee meeting, that'd be great.
Seems like the auditors too really helped you out as far as that was concerned. I mean, they put that in that audit report. I mean, it seems like that would be a place where you could go to say, okay, they studied it.
Well, Jill knows it too.
Yeah.
So we don't have a cash flow forecast. Is there anything else that you want to?
No.
Can you send that around though, please, or
Yes.
put it in a box?
It was in the finance, so it's in box there, but I'll make sure that it's in box.
If you could email it around to the board, that'd be great. Is that it on administrative report? Yes. Committee reports? Communications?
Okay.
Planning? Finance? Operations capital?
We haven't met in 2 months. I'm afraid to schedule a meeting until we're the power outage.
Personnel ditto except for the power outage. General discussion, One topic is January board meeting date.
Unless we're a forum for the board meeting on a regular date, I propose that we cancel the January board meeting and proceed forward to February 14th, which comes pretty close after the time that we get a full quorum together later in January. Unless there are pressing matters that argue otherwise, of course.
I'd prefer to have a board meeting in January because I think there are pressing matters such as the snow removal, a number of them that we've talked about today. How does everybody else feel about having a meeting versus skipping?
I'm fine with having a meeting whenever there's a quorum.
How about the 17th?
What day is it?
Saturday?
Saturday.
I'll be back in the country by that date.
That's fine for me.
It would work for me.
8 a.m., is that okay, Michael? 17th it is, works for me. And then I know there's one other thing, which is CSD Advocacy Alert on the Brown Act. You want to talk about that?
Right, so the Little Hoover Commission is asking for input on whether the Brown Act works, should be modified, improvements, whatever. So if any of us have interest in expressing any opinions on that, there is an online survey. It's only 5 questions, so it doesn't take much time, so I just wanted to let people know. That what? Yeah, I'll send the link, and Peter, here's what the questions are. Okay, I can send you the link.
What, you don't think he's going to read his email?
I never know. Facebook? I never know.
It's on Twitter, Peter.
Standish, I have one other item.
Sure.
Just a request, because this came up in my mind because I was dealing with the standardized methodology fee thing. What I realize is I don't have a good picture. I have a good picture of what our debt is. I don't have a good picture of how much money we will have to pay out in interest and principal each year for the next 30 years. You know, and this is the COP, it's the CalPERS thing, it's the snow removal loan we have to run that loan, it's obviously the Out Valley. I did a quick calculation in my own mind, I may be totally wrong, but I was coming up with something over $4 million a year in principal and interest payments, which is half
This
of.
as an agenda topic at our last meeting, we have backup on that, so we'll send
Okay.
that out to you. We did a whole,
You've got the whole
Yeah.
schedule of payments?
yeah.
Okay.
So we presented that at the last meeting, and I'll have Jill send that out if you have any
And there was
questions.
one item that was missing.
It was the Bank of the West.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And
And
we
everything
had-
else is already.
Okay, I would love to see that.
We have principal plus interest? Okay, for all of them. The other thing is, as Nancy pointed out, a lot of it is in the audited annual report. There's a section on that.
Okay.
I realize it's tough to read, but is there anything else in terms of general discussion? Well, thank you. I'm sorry it was almost a 4-hour board meeting. But thanks for attending. Meeting adjourned.